The first thing you hear is shouting. Not Peeves, not Filch, not even a Weasley. It's two of the greatest witches and wizards in history, screaming at each other across the Great Hall like first years in a food fight. Children of Muggles do not belong here, Salazar Slytherin's voice cracks off the stone like a curse. Candlelight flickers, banners shiver, and the enchanted ceiling is brewing the kind of storm that usually means Dementors or Voldemort just got a promotion. At the far end of the staff table, Godric Gryffindor is already on his feet, red hair blazing, half a goblet of wine abandoned, sword hilt visible at his hip, like this is about to stop being a staff meeting and start being a duel. Magic is magic, Salazar, he fires back. Or are you afraid they'll outshine your precious purebloods? Look, nobody was surprised. These two ended up here. The friendship between the bold, dragon-wrestling champion of bravery and the secretive, snake-whispering prince of pure blood pride was always a ticking time bomb. Tonight is when it finally goes off. Between them, Rowena Ravenclaw presses her fingers to her temple, like she's got a migraine so bad it could take out the entire Ravenclaw common room. Her blue robes are ink-stained, her eyes sharp, and there's a rolled parchment by her plate that looks suspiciously like a blueprint of the castle, lines of enchanted ink crawling and rearranging themselves while she breathes. We built this place together, she says, voice low but dangerous, to protect them, all of them. If you're wondering who them is, it's every witch and wizard hiding in the early Middle Ages when getting caught with a wand could end with you on a pyre. Hogwarts is brand new, raw stone and fresh magic, a sanctuary in the middle of a world that wants them gone. Helga Hufflepuff reaches out, steady and warm, the human equivalent of a calming draft. Honey-colored robes, flower on her cuffs, wand in one hand, goblet in the other, already charming a tiny golden cup on the table, so it keeps refilling itself. The first house cup quietly spinning between them like a reminder that, yes, they were supposed to be celebrating. Please, she says, we can find another way. On the table in front of them, an old battered hat sits very, very still. Godric's hat, the one all four of them have been whispering spells into for weeks, arguing about courage and cunning and wit and loyalty, trying to bottle their own judgment so Hogwarts can survive after they're gone. The brim twitches. If fabric could wince, it would, because this is the night the Sorting Hat learns something it's going to remember for 1,000 years. The founders do not agree on what worthy means, and if you've been paying attention, you know that hat still argues with them, every single year. When it sits on some terrified 11-year-old's head, it's carrying this fight inside its seams. Salazar's chair scrapes back, cloak swirling, eyes cold. He turns away from the staff table. For a second, nobody moves. Then the camera follows him, past the floating candles and the long house tables, down into a darker, quieter corridor most students will never see. Stone walls, dripping torches, a whisper of parcel tongue that makes the air itself recoil. He pauses at an unremarkable stretch of wall, hand pressed to the rock like he's testing a heartbeat. This corridor will become the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets, and he's already planning the basilisk sleeping in the bones of the castle. Smash cut. Rowena stands alone in a tower, that blueprint-like map of Hogwarts unfurled, staircases shifting, secret rooms sketching themselves into existence. Her brilliance is literally building the school. And yeah, it's going to cost her more than she knows. We'll get to that later. Helga laughs in a warm, crowded kitchen, charming that same golden cup so it shines brighter, linking it to the houses, to feasts, to the idea that everyone who works hard deserves a seat at the table. The future Hufflepuff cup spins in her hand, and somewhere a certain future Dark Lord is already adding it to his unhinged scavenger hunt. Godric raises his sword in a moonlit courtyard, steel catching starlight, facing down an enemy whose name history forgot but whose blood will stain the stones. That sword will end up in a sorting hat, in a basilisk, and in the hands of a scrawny kid who probably didn't do his homework. Back to the Great Hall. The candles flare, the hat sits alone, Cut to present day. You think you know the houses, the colors, the mascots, the stereotypes that started playground arguments and personality crises across the wizarding world. But you don't know the 4 people who built them. Not their grudges, not their secrets, not the messy, dangerous, and surprisingly petty story that almost killed Hogwarts before it became legend. Let's start with who these founders actually were and why the castle still hasn't recovered from them. You know the houses. You've taken the quizzes, argued about whether you're a Slytherin with Hufflepuff rising, and side-eyed anyone who proudly picks Gryffindor like it's a personality. But the people behind those crests, the actual living disasters who built Hogwarts in the middle of medieval witch hunt season, that's what we're unpacking. This isn't just Gryffindors are brave. Slytherins are ambitious, moving on. We're going full founder therapy session. Origin stories, personalities, bad decisions, and the receipts they left behind in the castle. We're pulling from the books, Pottermore, author interviews, and the kind of lore logic you come up with at 2 a.m. while staring at a Hogwarts floor plan and asking, why is the Hufflepuff common room basically in the kitchen? So here's the deal. We're going to start wide with the founding of Hogwarts itself. Roughly 1,000 years before Harry, in a Britain where being magical got you very quickly set on fire. 4 ridiculously powerful witches and wizards looked at a remote Scottish mountain and said, boarding school. Yeah, take a moment. From there, we'll move into each founder's backstory and personality. Godric Gryffindor, the original Chaos Gryffindor who apparently thought the solution to everything was sword. Salazar Slytherin, who might be evil or might just be a walking medieval Facebook comment section. Rowena Ravenclaw, the genius whose obsession with wit and invention helped doom her own daughter. And Helga Hufflepuff, the soft-spoken, loyalty-obsessed witch, who quietly ended up being the operational CEO of Hogwarts, while the others were busy monologuing. Look, nobody was surprised that their values turned into houses. Each founder literally handpicked the qualities they liked in students, which, if you've been paying attention, is why the Sorting Hat sounds like 4 people arguing in your head. We'll get to that later, because the hat starts as Godric's actual hat, enchanted by all 4 of them so it could keep sorting long after they're gone. Yes, the castle's most important HR manager is a piece of vintage clothing. Structurally, we're going to track the whole arc. The dream of a safe school, the way each founder shaped teaching and common room vibes, the slow ideological split, especially between Salazar and literally everyone else, and how that fight got carved into the stone of the castle. If you're wondering how that ends, it involves a secret underground murder snake and a chamber that should absolutely not pass any building inspection. Along the way, we'll dig into the artifacts. Godric's sword, Rowena's diadem, Helga's cup, Salazar's locket. 3 of them ended up as Horcruxes, because Voldemort looked at sacred historical relics and saw Pinterest ideas for soul storage. For now, let's celebrate that by the time we hit Harry's era, you're still feeling the fallout. The Chamber of Secrets existing at all? The diadem cursed in the Room of Requirement. The cup buried in Bellatrix's vault. We'll circle back to how the founders would react to modern Hogwarts under McGonagall, what they'd think of the post-Voldemort wizarding world, and whether they'd agree with how their houses turned out. But to understand that, we need to meet them properly. Let's start with Godric Gryffindor, the man, the myth, the walking health and safety violation. But before we charge in with Godric swinging his sword around like a one-man fireworks display, you need the backdrop. Because these 4 didn't wake up one morning and say, let's build a haunted boarding school with a murder snake in the plumbing. The wizarding world they were born into was already on fire. We're talking roughly 1,000 years before Harry. Early Middle Ages Britain, plagues, warlords, church power rising, and a general vibe of, if it moves and looks suspicious, set it on fire. Witch hunts weren't yet the organized, pamphlet-distributed nightmare they'd become, but superstition was climbing fast, and any unexplained illness, storm, or cow-related incident could get a magic user blamed, and then executed. Look, nobody was surprised when wizards started hiding. If you're wondering how magical kids learned anything before Hogwarts, the answer is badly. You had scattered apprenticeships, where a lone hedge witch in the woods took on 1 kid at a time, and taught them between brewing questionable potions and avoiding pitchforks. You had secretive family tutoring, with pure blood-style clans long before the word pure blood existed, hoarding spells like they were Gringotts vaults. And then you had the chaos option. No teacher, no wand law, just a terrified 10-year-old, turning the chicken coop inside out by sneezing. This was the age of accidental explosions, barns blown apart by misfired fire-making charms, wells poisoned by botched potions, invisible children running through villages, because someone discovered disillusionment before they discovered, don't do that in front of your muggle neighbors. Magical kids without guidance were dangerous to themselves, their families, and the very fragile, we exist but please don't notice us policy that existed long before anyone wrote the Statute of Secrecy. The founders looked at that and had the same thought. We need a plan. A hidden, centralized place where young witches and wizards could be trained properly, together, under rules that actually made sense. It was protective because you stopped kids from literally blowing themselves up. It was political because once you control magical education, you quietly control the future of the wizarding world. Who gets taught, what gets taught, and what ideas are considered normal. Yeah, take a moment, which, if you've been paying attention, makes the location of Hogwarts feel a lot less random. Remote Scottish Highlands, miles from major Muggle settlements, surrounded by mountains, forests, and weather so dramatic, it may as well be a character. The castle isn't just pretty, it's a fortress. The enchanted moving staircases, security system, confuse invaders, stall hostile wizards, and, as a bonus, guarantee at least 3 students a week are late to class. The shifting floor plan and secret passages turn the whole building into a maze that actively resists being mapped by muggles or enemies. To an outsider, it looks like a ruin. To anyone inside, it's a living, hostile puzzle that only cooperates if you belong there. Apparently that was the point. But here's where it gets messy. While they agreed on building the school, each founder had a very different idea about who belonged there and why the place should exist at all. Godric, Salazar, Rowena, Helga, same castle, 4 agendas. And when we meet them properly, you're going to see that those agendas were always a ticking time bomb under Hogwarts' shiny new foundations. Same castle, 4 agendas. So let's actually meet the Chaos Committee. Let's start with Godric Gryffindor. If Hogwarts had a "we'll definitely punch a dark wizard in the face" department, he ran it. Godric is bold, chivalrous, duel-happy, and apparently from the wild moorlands, which tracks, because this is a man who looks at a thunderstorm and thinks, perfect dueling weather. He's the kind of wizard who would absolutely start a bar fight over principle, then buy everyone around after. Godric's big thing is courage and doing what's right even when it hurts. So of course his relic ends up being a sword that literally appears out of a hat when you prove yourself brave enough. Subtle? Not even a little. Now if you're wondering who invited the walking red flag, enter Salazar Slytherin. Brilliant, proud, dangerously charismatic, and so cunning he probably had contingency plans for his contingency plans. Salazar's a parselmouth, obsessed with blood purity, and deeply suspicious of muggles, at a time when witch hunting was very real. Part visionary, part, this guy should not be in charge of admissions. He helps build a school to protect young witches and wizards, then secretly carves out a murder basement, drops a basilisk in it, and calls it a backup plan. The Chamber of Secrets is his love letter to the idea that only worthy blood belongs at Hogwarts, which, if you've been paying attention, is going to age about as well as a cursed diary. Rowena Ravenclaw is a completely different flavor of terrifying. Towering intellect, razor-sharp logic, and the kind of magical creativity that makes the rest of the wizarding world look like they're still playing with filibuster fireworks. She's the architect of Hogwarts' magical layout, the brain behind all those shifting corridors, and that enchanted staircase chaos that has ruined generations of punctuality. If anyone had a color-coded spell grimoire, it's Rowena, with tabs, indexes, and probably a charm that judges you if you dog-ear the pages. Her prized diadem literally boosts your intelligence, because of course her favorite accessory is a wearable study aid. And then there's Helga Hufflepuff, the one every casual fan underestimates. Warm, inclusive, food magic expert, and the quiet engine behind Hogwarts, feeling like home instead of a gothic murder maze. Helga builds the Great Hall's welcoming culture, fills the kitchens with house elves she actually treats decently, and makes sure every kid, no matter their background, gets fed and looked after. For now, let's celebrate the kindness, but do not confuse it for weakness. Helga is quietly terrifying when it comes to complex, subtle enchantments, the kind of witch who could curse your family line using a soup recipe and smile while doing it. And here's the key thing. These four weren't just archetypes stamped on trading cards. They were friends first, then co-founders, then ideological enemies. They laughed together, built this impossible castle together, and only later drew the battle lines over who deserved to walk its halls. Yeah, take a moment. Because next, we're going to pull each of them apart and track exactly how that friendship turned into a 1,000-year grudge written into the houses themselves. So let's cash that promise. You've got 4 legendary witches and wizards, 1 giant murder castle in the Scottish Highlands, and a world that literally wants to burn them. Why did each of them say yes to this insane group project? Let's start with Godric. Godric Gryffindor walks into history like a medieval DLC pack. Wandering warrior, dragon duelist, human embodiment of try me. He's watching witch hunts ramp up, seeing magical kids either get killed, recruited by dark wizards, or forced into hiding. So his pitch is simple: train defenders. He wants a school that forges brave witches and wizards who will stand up to dark forces and protect their own, while also shielding the wizarding world from Muggle persecution. That's why his relic is literally a sword, and why his house ends up obsessed with courage, chivalry, and running toward the problem instead of away from it. Rowena Ravenclaw hears castle, and immediately thinks lab. If you're wondering who turned Hogwarts into a living experiment, it's her. Rowena sees a chance to build a self-updating library with moving staircases, shifting rooms, and enchanted architecture that responds to magical theory like a research paper that fights back. In a world where knowledge can literally be burned at the stake, Hogwarts, to her, is a vault and a testing ground. She wants students who question, innovate, and preserve magic at a high level, which, if you've been paying attention, is exactly why Ravenclaw House ends up obsessed with wit, logic puzzles, and knowing 12 ways to do the same spell just because it's fun. Helga Hufflepuff shows up with a completely different energy. While the others are arguing about ideals, she's like, cool, but are the children fed? Helga's motivation is social and ethical. She wants a safe, welcoming place where magical kids of every background can belong, eat well, and learn without fear of cruelty or exclusion. She takes the students nobody else is specifically chasing and says, "You're mine. We're doing this together." That's why the kitchens are right next to the Hufflepuff common room, why her cup is tied to abundance, and why her house becomes the home of loyalty, hard work, and the quiet kind of bravery that doesn't need applause. And then, Salazar. Look, nobody was surprised that the guy who builds a secret snake chamber under the school has some trust issues. Salazar Slytherin absolutely wants a stronghold too, but only for what he calls worthy wizards. In his mind, Muggle-borns are walking security risks who will expose magic to a hostile world. So he backs the castle, helps design its defenses, and at the same time hardwires in a doomsday option, the Chamber of Secrets, and a basilisk to fix the school if it ever fills up with students he doesn't approve of. Put all that together, and you get the house traits we think we know: bravery, intelligence, loyalty, ambition. Clean, simple, great for merch. But those labels are about to get messy, because next we're digging into how those noble blueprints twisted over centuries into stereotypes, rivalries, and a sorting hat that still won't shut up about their original fight. So, to untangle how those blueprints got warped, you kind of have to stop thinking ancient noble founders and start thinking chaotic wizard startup. Yeah, take a moment. Hogwarts in year 1 is basically 4 co-CEOs, no board, no HR, no investor oversight, and a literal murder lizard in the basement as their security system.
Let's start with the vibe. It's the early Middle Ages. Witch hunting is picking up. And the wizarding world's brightest idea is, what if we built a giant magic castle in the middle of nowhere and filled it with children? Apparently nobody did a risk assessment. They just grabbed a cliff in Scotland, slapped on 1,000 enchantments, and called it a school. This is a stealth bunker, a research lab, and a slightly cursed boarding house all rolled into one. Godric is your move fast and break curses founder. The guy who volunteers to be beta tester, QA team, and crash dummy all at once. New defensive charm that might rebound and explode.
Godric's already in the courtyard like, what's the worst that could happen? Which, if you've been paying attention, is never something you ask out loud at Hogwarts. He's the one pitching dueling clubs, live fire spell practice, and probably suggesting they install a dragon on the grounds for educational purposes. Rowena is the product designer / CTO, and she is not here for Godric's chaos. She's obsessing over castle UX, staircase flow, room placement. How do you get hundreds of 11-year-olds from dorms to breakfast without half of them plummeting to their deaths? She charms the staircases to move, which sounds like a bug, but in her mind, is a feature. Security, randomness, and cardio all in one. She's plotting sightlines from the library, optimizing where the Great Hall goes, and probably inventing magical signage, because nobody can remember which corridor hides the bathroom. Helga is operations and culture, the quiet MVP. While the other three are arguing about curriculum, she's inventing the feasts, charming the plates to refill, and putting the Hufflepuff common room right next to the kitchens, like the world's greatest life hack. She's the one who says, we take everyone, and accidentally creates the only house that doesn't treat first years like they're auditioning for a cult. For now, let's celebrate the fact that without Helga, Hogwarts is just a damp murder castle where you die hungry. And then you've got Salazar, risk officer, shadow investor. The guy in every meeting going, love that for us, but what about security? At first that's useful. Anti-muggle protections, concealment charms, wards that stop angry villagers with torches. But he keeps pushing. What about the risk of muggle-borns? If you're wondering when this stops being a healthy compliance conversation and turns into a blood purity manifesto, it's right around the time he secretly installs a basilisk as his personal off-boarding policy. Put these four in a room, and you've got constant feature creep, scope fights, and one founder quietly building a doomsday bunker under the office. And the sorting hat? That's basically their shared corporate handbook with a face. We'll get to that later, because first we need to watch this startup implode. So what happens when your magical startup actually ships? You get Hogwarts, 1,000-year-old personality test you can live inside. The castle isn't just a backdrop, it's the four founders arguing in architecture. Let's start with Rowena. Cleverest witch of her age wasn't just a cute LinkedIn headline. If you're wondering who looked at a perfectly good staircase and said, what if it moved and tried to kill you on Mondays? That's Rowena Ravenclaw. The shifting staircases, vanishing steps, rotating corridors, and doors that only open if you solve a riddle. That's her idea of basic home security. If you can't remember which landing the 7th floor passage appears on, maybe you don't deserve to find the library. Rowena basically turned the school into a living exam paper. Hidden rooms, secret passageways, trick doors that demand logic or creativity before they'll let you through. It's part maze, part IQ test, part unhinged scavenger hunt. To outsiders, Hogwarts is impossible to map, which is kind of the point when muggles are literally out there with pitchforks. But to the students who pay attention, the building rewards curiosity. The castle is constantly asking, are you smart enough to be here? And Rowena is grading. Then you've got Godric, who looks at Rowena's labyrinth and goes, cool puzzle box, now let's make it war-proof. Those towering battlements? Defensive walkways for lookouts. The thick outer walls, arrow-slit windows, and high vantage points are straight out of a medieval fortress, because they actually were building during the Middle Ages while witch hunts were peaking. Godric's the one who makes sure that if an angry mob or dark wizard army shows up, Hogwarts can hold. The dueling courtyards and wide stone terraces? That's Gryffindor energy all over the floor plan. Space to train, to spar, to practice the kind of magic you only use when someone's actively trying to murder you. Layered on top of that are heavy-duty defensive enchantments, anti-apparition jinxes, muggle-repelling charms, and wards that make the whole place look like a ruin to non-magical eyes. The castle ended up as a fortress first, school second. Helga, meanwhile, is quietly making sure anyone who survives Rowena's death stares and Godric's combat arena has somewhere nice to sit down and eat. The Great Hall is basically her love language in stone. Long communal tables, enchanted ceiling, warm lighting, and food that appears like it's been waiting for you personally. She designs the kitchens right below, with easy access for house elves she actually treats kindly, which, if you've been paying attention, is radical for the wizarding world. Hufflepuff's fingerprints are all over the cozy spaces, low ceilings, plants, soft chairs, and the most welcoming common room entrance in the castle. No riddles, no passwords that change every 5 minutes. Just, are you decent and kind? Cool? Come in. For now, let's celebrate the one founder who didn't turn basic housing into a trauma response. And then there's Salazar, who looks at all this warmth and goes, needs more dungeon. The Slytherin common room tucked under the lake, with greenish light filtering through the water and stone pillars everywhere, is basically his aesthetic mood board. The actual dungeons, cold and sprawling, double as storage, detention, and oh yeah, the perfect cover for a secret monster lair. His masterpiece is the Chamber of Secrets, buried so deep even the other founders can't find it. A hidden cavern, a statue of himself the size of a building and a basilisk on call? Subtlety was not invited. We'll get to that later, because the chamber isn't just a creepy side quest. It's the architectural embodiment of the fight that tore these people apart. Look around Hogwarts now, and every creak, every portrait that won't shut up, every staircase that slides you into the wrong corridor is basically a 1,000-year-old group chat argument frozen into stone. Rowena's paranoia, Godric's battle prep, Helga's hospitality, Salazar's prejudice, they're all still talking. And the wild part? The castle is still updating that argument every single year, with new students, new secrets, and one very opinionated hat. The next thing it does to prove that is not even close to safe. Not even close to safe. Because the first thing the castle does to prove its point is hand a bunch of terrified 11-year-olds to the spiritual legacy of a guy who grew up in the magical equivalent of a Viking battlefield. Let's start with Godric Gryffindor. If you're wondering why his house is obsessed with charging headfirst into danger, like it's a school sport, look at where he probably came from. The texts hint that Godric hailed from wild moorlands, open sky, open ground, no walls to hide behind, and no polite distance between you and whatever wanted to kill you today. When you grow up like that, you don't learn subtlety. You learn to stand your ground, show your wand, and make sure everyone knows which side you're on. That environment basically carved his personality in stone. Godric valued boldness and straightforward conflict, because hedging your bets on the moors just gets you dead faster. So when it came time to pick students, he wasn't interested in quiet prodigies who wanted to sit in the back and annotate spell theory. He wanted the ones who would actually get up when it mattered. His criteria? Daring, nerve, and chivalry. Not just no fear, bravado, but the willingness to act while you're scared out of your mind. Which, if you've been paying attention, is literally the Harry Potter starter pack. Harry walking into the Forbidden Forest to die, Neville standing up to his friends in first year, then to Voldemort in 7th, McGonagall dueling Snape in the Great Hall, like it's just another Tuesday staff meeting. They're not fearless. They're terrified and moving anyway. That's Godric's DNA running straight through them. And this wasn't just a vibe. Godric had the dueling record to back it up. He was famous in his time for being a terrifyingly good fighter who openly opposed dark magic. Not just, oh no, political instability, but actual ethical lines in the sand. You can almost see the medieval wizard council meetings. Everyone arguing about land, titles, and who gets to tax which river. While Godric is in the corner like, cool, but maybe no human sacrifice blood rituals in the village this year. Look, nobody was surprised when he ended up founding the house that keeps producing Aurors. Then there's the Sword of Gryffindor. On paper, it's a goblin-made blade. Silver, rubies, very dramatic. In practice, it's Godric's entire philosophy turned into metal. The sword only presents itself to a true Gryffindor in desperate need, and when it does, it absorbs what makes you stronger, like basilisk venom, while leaving the poison behind. Yeah, take a moment. His artifact literally says, real bravery pulls power out of the worst situations and purifies what's already inside you. For now, let's celebrate that symbolism, because we'll get to that later when the sword pops out of the sorting hat in the Chamber of Secrets. Then again during the Battle of Hogwarts. Godric's been dead for 1,000 years, and he's still yanking weapons out of hats and deciding who's worthy. The Cult of Courage didn't stop with him, it's still swinging. And Godric? He's only 1/4 of this very unstable equation. And Godric? He's only 1/4 of this very unstable equation. Because if Gryffindor built a Cult of Courage, Salazar Slytherin built a survival strategy with fangs. Let's start with the thing that made him weird, even by wizard standards. Parseltongue. Being a Parselmouth is rare, creepy, and, in the medieval wizarding world, basically the social equivalent of showing up to brunch with a live snake scarf. People flinch. People whisper. So you've got Kid Salazar talking to snakes in the woods, realizing early that he is not like other children. That kind of isolation doesn't just hurt. It feeds this idea that he's set apart, special, maybe destined to lead instead of mix. And remember the time period. Hogwarts was founded in the early Middle Ages, while Muggles were literally burning people for suspicious vibes and bad weather. Witch hunts, pitchforks, she turned my goat purple energy. Wizards are hiding in forests and castles for a reason. If you're wondering why Salazar is side-eyeing Muggleborns, start there. To him, every Muggleborn is a walking security risk, raised by the same kind of people who light witches on fire, suddenly handed access to all the secrets of the wizarding world. At first that's paranoia. Give it a few decades, it curdles into fanaticism. So when he sets up his house, his criteria are not just evil in neon letters. He wants ambition, resourcefulness, cunning. The kids, who will do what it takes to survive a hostile world. Those qualities, in a medieval castle surrounded by angry torch mobs, actually make sense. But then he adds the lock. Pure blood status. To Salazar, that isn't just snobbery. It's a firewall. Keep Hogwarts' knowledge in families who are already fully inside the secret, who won't run home to their terrified Muggle parents and accidentally start a crusade. Look, nobody was surprised that this went badly, because once you turn security measure into moral hierarchy, you've basically pre-ordered Voldemort. Tom Riddle strolls into Slytherin centuries later. Here's the house sales pitch. Greatness, purity, secret chamber, and goes, yeah, take a moment. This is my brand. He weaponizes the ideology, slaps a skull on it, and recruits Death Eaters who treat Salazar's fear as gospel. But if you've been paying attention, Slytherin House doesn't line up neatly as evil Snake Pit. You get Snape, who spends half his life being the worst teacher imaginable, and the other half sabotaging Voldemort. You get Slughorn, social climbing collector of talent, who also literally hands Harry the memory that destroys a Dark Lord. You get Regulus Black, pure-blood prince who reads the Death Eater, fine print, panics, and dies trying to undo Voldemort's Horcrux. Salazar's legacy is messy. It creates monsters and martyrs in the same common room. And Salazar? He doesn't just argue in staff meetings and sulk off into the sunset. While Godric is enchanting a hat, Salazar is carving out a hidden chamber under the school and growing a living weapon that only his true heir can control. A basilisk, sleeping under the castle, waiting. Because in his mind, if the other founders ever got it wrong about who deserved to be at Hogwarts, he already built the ultimate backup plan, and the castle has been sitting on that secret for 1,000 years. So while Salazar is busy installing a murder snake under the foundations, Rowena Ravenclaw is basically building the operating system for Hogwarts' brain. If Gryffindor gave the school its heart, and Slytherin gave it its paranoia, Ravenclaw gave it the vibe of, what if homework, but fun? Let's start with what Rowena actually valued. She didn't want parrots. She wanted problem solvers. To her, intelligence wasn't just who could memorize the most potions ingredients. It was who could take those ingredients and invent something new, slightly alarming, and probably not ministry approved. Wit, creativity, original thought over blind obedience. If you were the kid asking why 3 times in a row until the adult gave up, yeah, take a moment. You're on her short list. Her criteria for students were weirdly specific, and, if you've been paying attention, kind of familiar. Rowena wanted people who loved learning for its own sake, not just for grades or glory. The ones who asked uncomfortable questions in class, who poked holes in famous theories, who saw a spell, and immediately thought, okay, but what if we cast this upside down at midnight? She prized the ability to think around corners. That's why centuries later, you get Luna Lovegood, walking conspiracy bored, strolling into Ravenclaw like the house was custom built for her. Everyone thinks she's just out there, but Rowena would have looked at Luna's radish earrings and spectre specs and gone, finally, someone getting it. And then there's the common room. Look, nobody was surprised that Ravenclaw ended up in a tower. Of course, the house obsessed with big ideas lives as high up as possible, staring at the stars and forgetting they left their quill 3 staircases down. The entrance isn't guarded by a password or a portrait that can be sweet-talked. It's a literal riddle door. You want to go to bed? Solve a logic puzzle first. This was almost definitely Rowena's idea. A daily pop quiz just to get into your own living room. Because in her mind, your brain should be switched on all the time, even when you're just trying to grab your charms textbook. But Rowena didn't stop at culture. She tried to bottle genius. Enter the diadem of Ravenclaw, her signature relic. A delicate, enchanted crown that supposedly makes the wearer wiser, which, if you've been paying attention, is the kind of thing that sounds noble and also like the opening line of a family curse. It's the ultimate Ravenclaw move. What if we could literally upgrade cognition? What could go wrong? Apparently, everything. Because that diadem doesn't just boost intelligence, it supercharges insecurity, envy, and ambition around it. Her own daughter, Helena, looks at this symbol of brilliance and decides to steal it, run away, and outsmart her own mother. That mother-daughter meltdown is going to echo all the way into Voldemort's Horcrux scavenger hunt. We'll get to that later, because for now, let's celebrate Rowena's legacy before we watch it implode. And while Rowena is out here accidentally inventing cursed family heirlooms, Helga Hufflepuff is doing something way less dramatic and way more radical. She's building a school where you don't have to be a prodigy, a pureblood, or a walking trauma response to deserve an education. Let's start with her most controversial opinion. She took the lot. Any kid, any background, any blood status, as long as they were willing to work hard and treat people decently. While Godric is chasing bravery, Rowena is hoarding brilliance, and Salazar is filtering for proper lineage. Helga is like, cool story, I'll take the actual good people. She values graft over glory, loyalty over ego, and fairness over flashy talent. In a world where wizards are literally being hunted, she chooses the kids nobody else would fight for. And then she makes Hogwarts feel like home. If you're wondering who's responsible for those absurdly perfect feasts, the ever-refilling plates, and the way the Great Hall basically functions like a magical 5-star buffet, that's Helga. She designs the enchanted food system with the house elves, builds that secret network of preparation and transport spells, and turns the castle's heart into a place where the whole school eats together. The Great Hall is her love language. Hufflepuff House literally grows out of that same idea. Their common room is tucked right by the kitchens, hidden behind barrels and warm stone, full of plants, low ceilings, and cozy chairs that look like they're permanently in Sunday afternoon nap mode. That's not an accident. She deliberately parks her students next to the food, the warmth, and the workers who keep the castle running, so they remember who they're connected to. Here's the thing the fandom sleeps on. Food magic and household enchantments are hard. We're talking constant, castle-wide, never-fail charms that manage temperature, freshness, quantity, and timing, all without poisoning thousands of teenagers. That's not soft magic. That's industrial-grade spellcraft. Subtle, sustained, and incredibly complex. Helga is basically doing logistics, hospitality, and large-scale magical engineering before the wizarding world has plumbing figured out, which, if you've been paying attention, totally recontextualizes modern Hufflepuffs. Tonks, the chaos metamorph magus Auror, who keeps choosing kindness. Cedric, the guy every teacher, student, and Golden Trio member respects, who plays fair even when it might cost him. Newt Scamander, the shy magizoologist who strolls into a global magical crisis with a suitcase and social anxiety, and still saves the day. These are not background extras. These are quiet badasses who do the hard, necessary work without demanding a statue every time. Pattern interrupt for you. If the four founders had to duel Voldemort one-on-one, who are you betting on? Godric with the sword? Rowena with the brain? Salazar with the snake? Look, nobody was surprised Voldemort idolized Slytherin, but the wild answer might actually be Helga, because her magic is everywhere, all the time. In the walls, in the food, in the protections that keep people fed, calm, and together. You don't just fight Helga Hufflepuff in a duel. You walk into a battlefield she prepared centuries ago. Yeah, take a moment. And while you're still recovering from imagining Helga as the quiet battlefield general of Hogwarts, the founders run into a very boring, very real problem. Paperwork. Not literally, but close. They realize they are not going to be around forever, and their whole, we personally pick who's worthy of our house system, that does not scale. Let's start with the nightmare scenario. You build this massive secret castle in the Scottish Highlands, during a time when the wizarding world is being hunted. You design 4 houses with wildly different values. You argue for years about who belongs where, and then you die. What happens to sorting? Does some poor deputy headmaster just vibe check 11-year-olds at the door? You look bravish. Off you go. No, these people are control freaks with wands, so they do something extremely on brand. They invent magical AI. The low-tech, floppy, slightly sweat-stained version. Godric takes his own hat, this very normal, very mortal piece of clothing, and they turn it into a sentient legacy device. All 4 of them sit down, together, and essentially upload a copy of their brains into the brim. If you're wondering how extra that is, remember, this is the same group that thought, school security? Let's add a giant murder snake. Compared to that, talking headwear is the reasonable option. They pour in their intelligence, their memories, their values. Not the full person, but a magical imprint. Godric's love of daring and chivalry. Rowena's obsession with wit and learning. Helga's fierce loyalty and refusal to leave anyone out. Salazar's ambition and his increasingly sketchy views about blood purity, all layered together, arguing forever inside one very tired hat. And that's why the sorting hat doesn't just go, "You're smart, Ravenclaw, you're nice, Hufflepuff." It digs. It looks at what you actually care about, at the choices you're likely to make, at the potential you haven't even touched yet. That's why Hermione can end up almost in Ravenclaw, why Neville gets offered Hufflepuff, why Harry can literally choose between Slytherin and Gryffindor. The hat is running 4 different founder philosophies at once, and sometimes they do not agree, which, if you've been paying attention, makes its songs way more interesting. Every few years it rolls out with a new track, and occasionally it stops the whole feast to go, "Hey, maybe this 4-way rivalry is getting a bit murdery, could we not?" Fans have long pointed out that the hat sounds like it remembers their arguments, the push for unity, the warnings about division, that feels like Rowena and Helga side-eyeing Godric and Salazar from inside the stitching. And apparently, it keeps evolving. It watches wars, Dark Lords, chamber reopenings, and it keeps adjusting its judgment call on kids. For now, let's celebrate that the founders actually planned for succession without a 1,000-year HR disaster. But what did the hat think, sitting up on that staff table while Salazar was quietly building a basilisk bunker under the school? We'll get to that later. So while the hat is sitting up there judging everybody, Early Hogwarts is having its absolute golden age. Tiny school, 4 overpowered professors, and a castle that's still figuring out where it wants to put its own staircases. Let's start with the first few classes. We're not talking hundreds of kids pouring in on the train. There is no train. It's a couple dozen witches and wizards at most, hiking in, boating in, probably getting lost in the Scottish fog, while Godric laughs and calls it character building. Each founder is basically running a magical honor seminar. Salazar personally drilling wand movements. Rowena assigning essays that are way too long for 11-year-olds. Helga checking that everyone's eaten, and Godric taking them out to the grounds for practical demonstrations, which is code for try not to die while I show you this spell. Because the numbers are so small, everybody knows everybody. You're in Gryffindor, but you still spend half your time brewing with Helga, or stuck in the library, as Rowena casually invents standardized testing. The houses are more like study groups than rival factions, and the founders are still experimenting. What even is a house cup when there are like 40 kids? Apparently, it starts as this informal thing Godric keeps bragging about. Gryffindor wins the first year because they showed the most daring in class participation, which, if you've been paying attention, means talked back the most. Rowena and Helga, meanwhile, are running the nerdiest, most wholesome research lab the wizarding world has ever seen. They're collaborating on new healing charms, safer potion methods, even early versions of protective enchantments that end up baked into the castle walls. Imagine late nights in the Great Hall, with tables shoved aside, cauldrons bubbling, enchanted quills scribbling notes, while students from every house test spells together. For now, let's celebrate that Hogwarts actually starts as a place where Slytherins and Hufflepuffs are literally co-authoring spell theory. And yes, at this point, Godric and Salazar are friends. Real friends. You've got the lion and the serpent dueling for fun in the courtyard, trading hexes so fast the students can't even track them, then bowing dramatically while Helga rolls her eyes and heals the scorch marks. They co-teach classes on defense and offensive magic, arguing mid-lesson about when it's acceptable to use a blasting curse. After hours, it's ethics debates in front of the fire, Godric pushing courage and responsibility, Salazar warning about hidden threats and the need for secrecy. It's intense, but it's still affectionate. The cracks come in quietly. Helga's admissions policy is basically, if you've got magic and a heartbeat, you're welcome. Rowena wants high standards, but she wants them applied to everyone. She's obsessed with potential, not blood. Salazar? He's watching Muggle witch hunts ramp up outside the walls and insisting the school needs stricter criteria. You know what that's code for. He wants fewer Muggle-borns, more old families, and he's not subtle about it. Godric pushes back. Rowena questions the logic. Helga flat out refuses to turn children away. At first, it's just tense staff meetings and a few sharp comments at the high table. But as Hogwarts grows, as word spreads that there's fortress in the north, training young witches and wizards, the pressure from outside, and from Salazar's own fears, starts to twist everything. Those tiny disagreements about who should be allowed in, they're about to become something much, much darker, and deep under the castle. One founder is already making plans for the day he stops getting his way. So, to really feel how bad this got, imagine the 4 greatest witches and wizards of the age in a chaotic Hogwarts group chat. Group name? Founders only, no students, no trolls. Yeah? Take a moment. Let's start with 2 a.m. Godric. You know this guy. Cape half on. Sword, probably out. Spamming the chat. We should train them to fight. Proper dueling, real monsters. Kids need to be ready. 3 messages, then 5, then... What if the castle walls could literally attack invaders? Because apparently sleep is for people who don't want sentient staircases. Rowena replies at 2:01 with a 40-line essay. She's dropping paragraphs about structural wards, defensive enchantment theory, and the epistemology of courage. You can practically hear the quill scratching. Somewhere around line 32,
She's quoting her own runic research and casually inventing 3 new charms. Nobody asked for a dissertation, but you're getting one. Helga? Helga just sends back a bread emoji, a badger, and maybe we start with making sure they're all fed and safe? X. The energy is mom friend who can and will hex you into next week if you touch her kids. But she's trying to keep the vibe soft. Then Salazar logs in. Fed and safe, yes, but only if they're from proper wizarding families. He drops it like it's a reasonable suggestion, while everyone else is choking on their pumpkin juice. This is where the admission standards fight keeps looping.
Godric is hammering talent over blood. Helga is like, if they want to learn and they're kind, they're in. Rowena is writing another scroll about magical potential and early Middle Ages persecution of their kind, which, if you've been paying attention, is exactly why Hogwarts exists. Salazar? Muggleborns are a security risk. I will leave the school. He says it once, then again, then every other week. If you people keep ignoring this, I'm gone. Look, nobody was surprised when he actually meant it. He'd been threatening to rage quit the group chat since the first Muggle-born kid aced charms. They're arguing about how much to weaponize Hogwarts itself. Godric wants animated armor and secret passages for tactical retreats. Rowena is like, what if the Sorting Hat could assess their minds and place them optimally for growth? Helga's in the corner going, cool, but also, can we not turn the school into a murder maze? Meanwhile, Salazar is quietly taking notes like, secret passages, you say? Totally fine. Nothing suspicious. House rivalry even shows up in the chat. Godric drops. Little competition builds character. Rowena counters with a lecture on collaboration and shared research. Helga keeps sending, we can compete in Quidditch and still eat together, you animals. Salazar wants Slytherin students kept apart. For their own good. Sure, John. Underneath the snark, it's brutal. These aren't just co-workers arguing policy. They're old friends realizing they don't actually want the same future. Godric keeps trying to mediate. Rowena keeps intellectualizing her heartbreak. Helga keeps pasting over the cracks with kindness. And every time Salazar types, I'll leave, what he's really doing, deep under the castle, is carving out a monster-filled contingency plan for the day the group chat finally goes silent. The threats don't start inside the castle. They start outside, with pitchforks, torches, and people who think trial means tie her to a stake and see what happens. Witch burnings, superstition, and whispered rumors about a hidden fortress of sorcerers start spreading through medieval Britain like a particularly contagious case of magical gossip. Because if you're wondering why the founders get so weird about Muggleborns, you have to remember the timeline. This is the early Middle Ages. Non-magical authorities are panicking over failed crops, strange weather, and that one guy in the village who can light a fire without flint. She floated? Must be the devil. That kind of energy. Let's start with Helga and Rowena, because these two are actually looking at the terrified kids in the middle of this mess. Helga keeps finding Muggle-born children who've accidentally blown up a haystack or turned their own hair blue and are about 5 minutes away from being called demons. To her, Hogwarts isn't just a school, it's a shelter. She's basically running the wizarding world's first magical witness protection program. Rowena agrees, but she's doing the math. If raw, untrained magic is popping up in Muggle villages, and Muggles are already talking about a hidden castle, then the safest place for those children is inside the very castle they're afraid of. Teach them control, teach them secrecy, and you reduce accidental magic that draws attention. In her mind, every Muggle-born you leave out there is a walking, talking exposure risk. Godric? Godric looks at a Muggle-born kid who still comes to Hogwarts after watching their village try to drown their witch neighbor, and says, yeah, you're brave enough. He cares way more about courage and character than blood. A Muggle-born who stands up to a mob or sneaks away from home to protect the people around them from uncontrolled magic, fits his house perfectly. In his head, these students aren't liabilities. They're future allies when the real evil shows up wearing skull masks or preaching purity, which, if you've been paying attention, is exactly where he and Salazar stop speaking the same language. Salazar is watching the same witch burnings and hearing the same rumors, but his brain goes straight to worst-case scenarios. To him, Muggleborns are potential spies, without even meaning to be. They go home for holidays. They have non-magical families who can be threatened, tortured, or bribed. Under enough pain, who wouldn't reveal where the secret magic castle is? He mixes real fear with very real prejudice. He decides Muggleborns are weaker, less loyal, less of them, and that makes them the perfect pressure point for hostile kings, priests, or angry villagers. While Helga sees kids who need rescuing, Salazar sees cracks in the walls. While Rowena is drafting better secrecy protocols, he's imagining dungeons full of captured students spilling passwords, and he doesn't stop at arguing in staff meetings. The paranoia needs a project. So, quietly, deep under the school, Salazar starts building something, a backup plan, a monster-filled answer to the Muggle-born question that, centuries later, is going to wake up in the worst way possible. We'll get to that later. This isn't just a secret room. This is Salazar Slytherin building a magical doomsday device under a school full of children. Let's start with the construction job from actual Nightmare Land. While Godric is arguing about curriculum and Helga is designing kitchens, Salazar is quietly mapping the bedrock under Hogwarts. He picks the deepest point, below the foundations, below the cellars, below what will eventually become the plumbing, and he carves out a cathedral-sized chamber in pure secrecy. No staff meeting, no safety forms, just one very paranoid genius with a wand and a grudge. The access key? Parcel tongue. If you're wondering why the entrance needs hissing at in snake language, it's because Salazar wants a lock coded to his DNA-adjacent talent. Only a Parselmouth can open it, which, if you've been paying attention, basically limits its use to his bloodline or the rare, cursed few like him. This isn't some shared school resource. It's a private panic room with murder settings. And at the heart of it, he installs his solution to the Muggle-born problem, a basilisk. Not a guard dog, not a deterrent, a living, breathing last resort weapon. Salazar's logic is chillingly simple. If Hogwarts ever falls to what he sees as impurity, his heir can unleash the serpent, let it slither through the pipes, and quietly correct the student body. It's genocidal magical pest control, wrapped in the language of tradition. Look, nobody was surprised that Slytherin skewed dark. But this is another level. He doesn't just hide the monster, he wires it into the castle's infrastructure. The basilisk moves through pipes and tunnels that prefigure the school's plumbing, like a parasite built into Hogwarts' veins. Centuries later, when toilets and sinks get added, they're literally sitting on top of a murder snake expressway. Yeah, take a moment. Symbolically, it's brutal. On the surface, you have classrooms, feasts, friendships, all the warm, Hogwarts is my home energy. Underneath, a festering chamber of hate, waiting for the right password. It turns the whole castle into a metaphor for unresolved prejudice in the wizarding world. Shiny towers above, rotting ideology below. Fast forward to Tom Riddle, a half-blood obsessed with blood purity, who just happens to be a Parselmouth and a Slytherin prodigy. He finds the chamber, bonds with the basilisk, and weaponizes Salazar's paranoia against an entirely new generation. Harry, Hermione, Colin Creevey, Ginny Weasley all nearly die because one medieval founder couldn't get over his issues. Salazar's backup plan ends up being Voldemort's beta test. And the wildest part? The other founders never fully grasp what he's built. They suspect secrets, they feel the rift. But by the time anyone realizes how far he's gone, tearing it out would mean tearing Hogwarts apart. Or at least, that's what everyone believes. We'll get to whether they were right. So what finally blows it all up? What turns quiet side eyes and whispered suspicions into the fight the Sorting Hat still won't shut up about? Let's start with the night Salazar decides Hogwarts has to choose. Picture the Great Hall. No students. Just 4 founders, 1 long table, and a storm outside that apparently heard the assignment. Salazar has been stewing for months, watching more Muggle-born kids arrive every year while witch burnings spike across Britain. Tonight, he stops pretending it's fine. He tells them flat out, no more Muggle-borns. Not stricter screening, not case by case. Bar them. Close the doors. Protect their kind before the outside world finds them. And he doesn't say it like a proposal. He says it like a verdict. Godric, instantly on his feet. The man is allergic to sitting quietly during a moral crisis. He calls it what it is. Fear dressed up as purity. Cowardice in fancy green robes. If you're wondering, yes, he absolutely brings up the basilisk rumors, because Godric is not subtle and has never tried to be. Salazar fires back that Godric is a child-playing knight, that his hero complex will get them all killed, that Muggle-borns are walking security leaks no matter how talented they are. He talks about pitchforks, torches, families wiped out overnight. And the worst part? The fear under the rant isn't completely wrong, which, if you've been paying attention, is exactly what makes him dangerous. Rowena steps in with that razor-sharp logic she thinks can fix anything. She starts quoting numbers. How many Muggle-borns have saved classmates already? How much magic they'd lose if they cut off half their applicants? How secrecy charms and wards are a better solution than exile? It's basically a PowerPoint without the slides. Helga goes the other way. No charts, just their children. They belong here, all of them. She reminds Salazar of specific kids. The shy Muggle-born who can already control fire better than most adults. The one who healed a classmate before Madame Smedley could even get there. She asks him quietly who he'd send home first. None of it lands. Salazar's paranoia and pride have already linked arms and gone marching off together. Every attempt to compromise sounds to him like betrayal. Every appeal to compassion feels like they're asking him to gamble his people's lives on good intentions. The voices get louder. Wands are on the table now, not pointed, but close. The enchanted ceiling is flashing like it's about to call security. Finally, Godric says the line. You know he's been holding back. If Salazar can't trust the school they built together, maybe he shouldn't be part of it. Yeah, take a moment. Salazar does. Then he stands, very calm, which is somehow worse than the shouting. He tells them Hogwarts has chosen, already, by siding with interlopers over its own. He says that if they will not cleanse the school, his true heir will one day, when the castle is rotten enough to need it. Prophecy? Threat? Bit of both. He walks out. No duel. No dramatic curse. Just a man leaving his life's work behind, and pretending that means he's the one in control. But he doesn't really leave, does he? His house stays. His values keep sorting kids. His basilisk sleeps under the floors. And the other 3 have to decide. Do they tear out everything Slytherin touched and risk breaking Hogwarts itself? Or learn to live with a monster quietly wired into the foundations? We'll get to what they choose. We'll get to what they choose. But pause. Zoom in on Salazar for a second, and ask the uncomfortable question. Was he the cackling villain of a kid's story, or the wizarding world equivalent of that nightmare product manager who only speaks in worst-case scenarios? You know the type. Every workplace, every order, every council has that one person whose entire personality is, okay, but what if everything explodes? That was Salazar, paranoid risk officer, walking disaster forecast. The guy in the meeting who says, what if Muggles burn the school down with pitchforks, and then doesn't stop talking for 3 hours? And look, nobody was surprised he was like this, because the persecution was real. We're in the early Middle Ages here. Witches and wizards are being hunted, tried, and creatively executed by Muggles who think subtlety is a slightly smaller bonfire. Salazar didn't invent the fear. He just dialed it up to 11 and snapped the knob off. If you're wondering, okay, but how bad could he really be? Remember his solution. Other founders. Protective charms, secret location in the Scottish Highlands, education for young witches and wizards so they don't accidentally set the village on fire. Salazar, genocidal basilisk in the basement as a backup plan. Yeah, take a moment. This is where that worst-case mindset slides from caution into obsession. It's one thing to say, we should be careful who we trust. Muggles can be dangerous. It's another to literally hand-build a murder snake, wire it into the plumbing, and tie it to a password only your bigoted descendants can use. That's not security. That's a long-term extermination feature. But here's the tricky part. Would he have sounded as extreme in his own time as he does to you now? Or was he just saying the quiet part loud while everyone else politely looked at their shoes? Because a lot of pure-blood wizards already thought Muggle-borns were risky, unstable, or at least socially inconvenient, which, if you've been paying attention, is exactly the attitude that keeps echoing in Slytherin centuries later. Let's start with the comparison the story almost hides from you. Helga Hufflepuff lived through the same danger, same bonfires, same mobs, same fear that one wrong move exposes the castle. But her answer wasn't, call the student body. Her answer was, make the student body so loyal, so united, that they'd rather die than betray this place. While Salazar built a secret weapon, Helga built a secret network. Kitchens staffed by house elves who adored her. A house that took in the overlooked kids from every background. Traditions that made Hogwarts feel like home instead of a bunker. She trusted that inclusion made the school harder to break, not easier. And after 1,000 years, whose strategy aged better? We'll get to that later, because next, we're looking at how each founder's legacy mutated over the centuries, and which of them would be most horrified to see what their house ended up becoming. So if Helga is the warm, steady heart of Hogwarts, Rowena is the brain that never shuts off, which, if you've been paying attention, makes her family drama hurt even more. Because the smartest witch of her age could design a castle that rearranges staircases, but apparently couldn't figure out how to make her own daughter feel seen. Let's start with Helena Ravenclaw. You meet her in the films as the Grey Lady, floating around like an introvert at a loud party. But in life, she was Rowena's only child. Imagine growing up as Rowena's daughter, while your mum is literally the blueprint for the word brilliant. Every portrait, every corridor, every student sorted into Ravenclaw is basically a reminder that your mother is a legend and you're the sequel nobody asked for. Helena wanted to be special on her own terms, not just the DLC pack for Rowena's greatness. So she makes a choice. A terrible, very on-brand for this family choice. Rowena creates the diadem of Ravenclaw, an enchanted circlet that enhances the wisdom of the wearer. It's her masterpiece, the physical embodiment of everything she values. Helena looks at that and thinks, if I wear it, I'll finally be more than just her child. One night, she steals the diadem and runs, leaves Hogwarts, leaves her mother, disappears into distant forests in Albania, because apparently that's where you go if you want to cause maximum future plot chaos. Rowena is shattered. The woman who could outthink anyone suddenly can't solve the one problem that matters. Her daughter is gone, and she's too proud or too broken to chase her herself. She falls ill, her heart basically giving out before the rest of her body catches up. And in that state, she makes her own awful choice. She asks another former student, a dark, intense wizard, who is in love with Helena, the man who will become the Bloody Baron, to bring her daughter back. Not talk to her, not comfort her, bring her back. If you're wondering how badly that goes, the answer is maximum disaster. The Baron tracks Helena down, demands she return. She refuses. She's done being Rowena's shadow, even if it kills her. He flies into a rage, stabs her in the forest, and then, in instant horror at what he's done, turns the blade on himself. That's why Helena wanders Hogwarts as the Grey Lady, and he drifts around, drenched in spectral blood. Two ghosts, locked forever in the fallout of one family argument that escalated like a cursed group chat. And Rowena? She dies never seeing Helena again. Her greatest work, her diadem lost with her daughter, except it isn't. Centuries later, Tom Riddle charms the truth out of Helena's ghost, follows her memory back to that Albanian forest, finds the diadem, and turns it into a Horcrux. Rowena's symbol of wisdom becomes a container for Voldemort's shredded soul, and ends up hidden in the very castle her heartbreak helped shape. So when Harry, Ron, and Hermione are racing through the Room of Requirement, they're not just blowing up a random artifact. They're literally burning the last physical echo of a 1,000-year-old mother-daughter tragedy. And the wild part? Rowena's not the only founder whose legacy Voldemort hijacks for his little immortality project. And that brings us to the founder Voldemort massively underestimated. The one whose relic he turned into a Horcrux without realizing he was hijacking the magic of the castle's beating heart. Helga Hufflepuff. The nice one. Yeah, take a moment. Let's start with the house elves, because this is where Helga quietly rewires the entire castle. In most old wizarding families, house elves are basically magically shackled servants, punished for breathing too loud, and treated like animated furniture. Looking at you, Black family tapestry. Helga sees that system and goes, absolutely not. She invites house elves to Hogwarts, gives them safe, stable work in the kitchens, and builds protections into the castle so nobody can treat them like punching bags. They're hidden, fed, and essential, not disposable. If you're wondering why Hogwarts never runs out of food, blankets, or pumpkin juice, that's Helga too. She's the one enchanting the Great Hall, the kitchens, the food systems, so that the castle always feels abundant. The ceiling might be Godric-level dramatic, but the magic that makes roast chicken and treacle tart appear in front of terrified 11-year-olds? That's Helga's domestic sorcery, cranked up to legendary. She turns meals into a ritual of safety. You sit, you're fed, you're included. After centuries of Muggle persecution, that is radical. And her admissions philosophy? Even more radical. While Godric is collecting brave idiots, Rowena is hoarding geniuses, and Salazar is building a pure-blood fan club with a built-in murder snake. Helga basically says, bring me everyone else. The loyal, the patient, the awkward kids who don't know who they are yet. The ones who don't fit the other founders' neat little boxes still get a place to belong and grow. Which, if you've been paying attention, is exactly what keeps saving the wizarding world over and over. Fast forward to modern Hogwarts. Dumbledore's army is meeting in the Room of Requirement, planning resistance, learning Patronuses, risking expulsion. How do those meetings usually end? With stolen food from the kitchens, courtesy of Dobby and his friends. That's Helga's system literally fueling a teenage insurgency. Her hospitality magic is what lets resistance feel like a sleepover instead of a funeral. And when the Battle of Hogwarts hits, look who stands their ground. Hufflepuffs, Ernie Macmillan, Hannah Abbott, all the students who were told they were just the nice ones end up defending the school like it's their own living room. Because to them it is. McGonagall can raise statues and call parents, but the reason Hogwarts still feels like a sanctuary, even in wartime, is that Helga built it that way from day one. So when characters call Hogwarts home, when the train ride back feels like returning to safety, you're feeling Helga's magic more than anyone else's. She weaponized kindness, turned hospitality into a shield, and made belonging the strongest spell in the castle. And next, we're going to see exactly how that warm, welcoming magic clashes with Salazar's lingering curse buried under the floorboards. Helga turned hospitality into armor. Salazar buried a murder snake under the plumbing. And right between those two energies, Godric quietly left behind the sharpest plot twist in the entire wizarding world, his sword. Let's start with what this thing actually is. The Sword of Gryffindor wasn't some random shiny prop the art department whipped up. It was forged 1,000 years ago by Ragnarok I, a goblin master smith who probably judged every human blade like a personal insult. Goblin silver is special because it absorbs what makes it stronger. Magic, power, venom. If you're wondering why basilisk juice didn't just melt it into goo, it's because the metal literally drank that venom and leveled up. That's Godric's whole vibe. Warrior, not warlord. He wanted a weapon that didn't just kill things, but adapted, endured, and could be used by the right person at the right time. And then he went one step further and basically made it a moral litmus test. The sword doesn't sit in a glass case, waiting for whoever has the fattest vault at Gringotts. It appears only to a true Gryffindor in need. Not pure blood, not noble title, not my dad donated a wing to the hospital. Just courage under fire, which, if you've been paying attention, is Godric screaming his values across a millennium. He literally hands his old hat to the group project. They all enchant it. And suddenly, the sorting hat can yank the sword out of itself like a magical clown car for whoever proves they've got the nerve. You don't inherit Gryffindor's power by blood. You earn it by choice. Look at the sword's highlight reel. It starts with Godric, ends up stored in the sorting hat, and then centuries later, scrawny second-year Harry is in the Chamber of Secrets, facing Salazar's basilisk with a bird and a hat. Worst loot drop ever, right? Until Harry proves he's willing to die to save Ginny. The hat coughs up the sword, Harry slays the basilisk, and that goblin silver drinks in the venom like it's a protein shake. Fast forward to Deathly Hallows. Because the blade absorbed basilisk venom, it's now one of the only things on Earth that can reliably destroy Horcruxes. Harry uses it on the locket. Ron finishes the job. Then, in the Battle of Hogwarts, Neville Longbottom, the boy who used to lose his toad more than his homework, pulls the sword from the hat and decapitates Nagini. Yeah, take a moment. The irony is brutal. Voldemort spends decades hunting Founder relics to twist into Horcruxes, and Godric's relic becomes the anti-Horcrux, the built-in counterspell he never saw coming. Godric accidentally out-engineers the greatest dark wizard of all time, but while Godric's legacy sliced Horcruxes in half, Salazar's and Helga's prized artifacts didn't get off so clean. One became a vessel for Voldemort's soul, the other turned into cursed treasure, and together they dragged two founders' names into the dark. For now, let's celebrate the win, because next, we're diving into how those relics got corrupted and who paid the price. If Godric's sword was built to end dark magic, Rowena's diadem was built to upgrade your brain. This thing is literally an intellect buff in tiara form. Let's start with what it was actually meant to do. Rowena Ravenclaw, the wit beyond measure queen herself, creates a diadem enchanted to enhance the wearer's wisdom. Not give you random facts, but sharpen how you think, how you connect ideas, how you solve problems. It's Rowena's whole personality turned into jewelry, ruthless about self-improvement, obsessed with the idea that you can always be smarter if you just work hard enough, or, wear the right crown, which, if you've been paying attention, is also kind of dark, because when your house founder is that fixated on intellect, it's really easy for wisdom to slide into arrogance. Enter Helena Ravenclaw, Rowena's daughter, future Grey Lady, and the wizarding world's most tragic poster child for I stole my mum's magical artifact and ran away. Helena nicks the diadem and hides it in a forest in Albania, trying to escape her mother's shadow and the pressure of being the Ravenclaw princess. That forest becomes the diadem's graveyard for centuries. Nobody finds it. Nobody even knows it's there. It just sits, quietly radiating wasted potential, while the rest of the wizarding world forgets it ever existed. Until Tom Riddle shows up. Years later, at Hogwarts, a charming, dead-eyed prefect decides to interrogate a ghost. Voldemort corners the Grey Lady, flatters her, and apparently weaponizes every ounce of Slytherin charisma to charm the story out of her. If you're wondering how manipulative he really was, he literally convinces Helena to spill the location of the one thing she's kept secret for hundreds of years. She tells him about the forest in Albania. He goes, finds the diadem, and decides, great, this is my soul hat now. Voldemort turns it into a Horcrux, corrupting Rowena's masterpiece with a piece of his fractured soul. Then he brings it back to Hogwarts and hides it in the Room of Requirement, which is so poetic it's rude. A relic of pure intellect, now stuffed into a junk mountain built out of Hogwarts' own magic and centuries of student secrets. A founder's artifact buried under contraband, broken furniture, and bad decisions. Fast forward to Deathly Hallows, the diadem is finally found, and immediately gets annihilated by fiendfire. Cursed, sentient, dragon-shaped hellfire conjured by Crabbe of all people. Yeah, take a moment. Rowena's legacy, twisted into a Horcrux, is burned out of existence by wild, uncontrollable dark magic in the very school she helped build. Symbolically, that fiendfire is doing double duty. It's burning away a corrupted version of Ravenclaw's ideals, while actual Ravenclaws, Luna guiding Harry, Cho helping earlier, the whole house fighting, help bring Voldemort down. Rowena's name gets dragged through Horcrux mud, but her house ends up on the right side of history. And Voldemort isn't done, because once you've stolen one founder relic, why stop? Next, we'll connect this diadem disaster to Helga's cup and Salazar's locket, and how Voldemort used all three to cosplay as a twisted fifth founder of a much darker Hogwarts. If Rowena's diadem was about dangerous intellect, Helga's cup is about something even scarier in the wizarding world, kindness getting weaponized. Let's start with the cup itself, before Voldemort turns it into his own personal soul thermos. Helga's cup is small, golden, and easy to miss if you're used to, legendary swords and cursed tiaras. It's engraved with tiny badgers marching around the rim, like they're doing a very serious parade about crop rotation and fair pay. This isn't a war trophy. This is a celebration piece. You can almost see Helga at a feast, filling it to the brim to toast hard work, community, and the students who stayed late to clean up after everyone else bailed. If you're wondering, yes, it probably showed up at early Hogwarts feasts and little ceremonies, passed around to honor people who did the unglamorous work. The cup screams abundance and shared effort. It's literally the anti-Horcrux vibe, which is exactly why Voldemort couldn't resist corrupting it. Fast forward a few centuries. The cup ends up with Hepzibah Smith, a distant Hufflepuff descendant, an extremely enthusiastic hoarder of founder merch. She's rich, vain, and loves to brag about her collection. Look, nobody was surprised. She invited her handsome young shop boy, Tom Riddle, over for a private showing. Terrible idea. She proudly shows him Helga's cup and Salazar's locket together, like she's unveiling the world's most cursed Etsy haul. Riddle, who is already deep into his immortality but make it murder era, sees two founder relics just sitting there with minimal security and maximum ego. You know what happens next. Hepzibah mysteriously dies, the memory gets tampered with, and the cup quietly disappears. Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. After using another brutal murder to split his soul, Voldemort turns Helga's cup into a Horcrux. The symbol of loyalty and shared abundance becomes a cursed vessel of greed and self-preservation. Then he hands it off to Bellatrix Lestrange, the human embodiment of a cursed chandelier, to hide in her Gringotts vault. Bellatrix's vault is the opposite of everything Hufflepuff stands for. It's stacked with gold, stolen heirlooms, and dark artifacts, all protected by a Gemino and Flagrante curse combo that makes everything multiply and burn when touched. A modest little cup, meant to celebrate community, ends up buried under a mountain of fake, flaming treasure. Yeah, take a moment. That image is the whole point. A Hufflepuff relic, house of fairness and modesty, locked away in a dragon-guarded vault of excess. Loyalty twisted into possessiveness. Abundance warped into hoarding. The wizarding world's quiet, background house turned into the centerpiece of Voldemort's greed. And we're still not done with Hepzibah's Flex collection, because sitting right beside that cup in her parlor was Salazar's locket. We'll get to that later, but when that Slytherin heirloom joins the party, Voldemort's fake fifth founder act stops being metaphor and starts becoming prophecy, for his rise and for his fall. So, Salazar's locket. The moment that thing shows up, you're not just looking at jewelry. You're looking at Slytherin's personality condensed into one smug metal object. Let's start with what it actually is. A founder's relic that probably began as Salazar's personal crest, wrapped up with his pride in being a Parselmouth and his obsession with noble blood. It's basically his family tree, status symbol, and no Muggleborns allowed. sign all in one. If you're wondering what happened after Salazar stormed out of Hogwarts, the answer is generational disaster. The locket went down his bloodline, eventually ending up with the Gaunts, who took his elitism and cranked it up to 11. By the time we meet them, that proud pureblood dynasty is living in a collapsing shack by a swamp, screaming in parcelled tongue at muggles and carving "I'm important, I swear" into the walls. Look, nobody was surprised that inbreeding plus dark arts plus nostalgia for a guy who built a murder snake led to complete chaos. That's the environment Tom Riddle walks into. He sees the locket, hears "Last of the Line of Salazar Slytherin," and you can almost hear his villain origin theme kick in. He steals it from his Uncle Morphin, rewrites the story, so he's the glorious heir. And then, because he's Voldemort, he decides this thing isn't just a symbol, it's going to be a Horcrux. Cut to Hepzibah Smith's parlor, where the locket is sitting next to Helga's cup, trying to look innocent. Voldemort charms her, poisons her, steals both artifacts, and later murders someone to stuff a piece of his soul into Salazar's locket. Yeah, take a moment. The heir of Slytherin literally weaponizes his ancestor's necklace and then hides it in a seaside nightmare cave, guarded by Inferi, and a cursed potion that forces you relive your worst memories while you drink it. Regulus Black takes one look at that setup and says, "Absolutely not." He drags Creature into the cave, forces him to help, and when Regulus realizes what the Horcrux is, he sends Creature home and goes back alone to die. Creature survives, traumatized, clutching the fake locket, and spends the next few decades muttering about the master while the real one bounces around the wizarding world. Enter Dolores Umbridge, the pink cardigan-wearing ministry troll, who ends up with Salazar's locket around her neck, like she's cosplaying oppressive bureaucracy. Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy's heirloom. She uses it as a prop for her blood status witch hunt, which, if you've been paying attention, is exactly the kind of thing Salazar would have applauded. Finally, Harry, Ron, and Hermione steal it, and destroying it is not just a stab at the shiny thing moment. The locket fights back with visions of Harry as a useless fraud, Hermione abandoning Ron, and all the worst insecurities screaming in Dolby surround. To kill it, they have to face their own minds. Pattern interrupt. That is exactly the kind of brutal psychological test Salazar might have admired, if he hadn't turned his legacy into a swamp of supernatural misery in the first place. And here's where the founders start arm wrestling Voldemort across 1,000 years. Let's start with Salazar, because he's the easiest to compare and the messiest to unpack. Salazar was an actual pure-blood supremacist. He built a secret murder snake in the plumbing as a backup plan for ethnic cleansing. Subtlety was not his brand. Voldemort shows up centuries later, screaming about noble pure bloodlines, while being a half-blood named Tom from a Muggle orphanage. If you're wondering, yes, that's the magical equivalent of a billionaire influencer selling minimalism courses. Salazar at least believed his own awful ideology. Voldemort weaponizes Salazar's rhetoric as a control mechanism. He hijacks Slytherin's legacy, slaps the dark mark on it, and suddenly scared pure-blood families are lining up to die for a guy who literally would have been on Salazar's get-out-of-my-school list. Which, if you've been paying attention, makes Voldemort less a true heir and more a fanboy cosplaying as one to keep his followers terrified and obedient. Now jump to Godric. Godric's whole deal was courage. Charge the dragon, stand your ground, probably jump off something tall, with a sword and zero plan. That impulse gets echoed straight into the DA and the Order of the Phoenix. You've got a bunch of teenagers in a secret classroom learning defensive spells because the government is gaslighting them about the Dark Lord's return. That is Gryffindor energy on steroids. The Order? It's basically Godric's alumni association. Former students, teachers, random brave weirdos, all deciding that if the Ministry won't fight, they will. Harry leading Dumbledore's army, Neville standing up to Death Eaters in his 7th year, McGonagall dueling Snape in the Great Hall. This is Godric's bravery over comfort philosophy, upgraded for a wizarding world where the stakes are global extinction, not just oops, Trolls in the dungeon. Rowena's legacy runs quieter, but it's the engine under the whole war. She valued wit and learning, and she literally helped enchant the sorting hat so knowledge could keep sorting kids after they were gone. Fast forward, knowledge is the thing that breaks Voldemort. Horcruxes, wand lore, the Hallows, the Room of Requirement. Every major win comes from somebody knowing something obscure and acting on it. Hermione decoding the Horcrux books. Dobby knowing about the room. Harry realizing the diadem is hidden where thousands have hidden things. That's Rowena's dream curriculum. Use your brain or die trying. And Helga? She's the Battle of Hogwarts. All of it. She took the rest, the students everyone else overlooked, and said, "We're in this together." That spirit shows up when literally everyone, Hufflepuffs, Slytherins, house elves with frying pans, centaurs, even the statues, rally to defend the castle. They're not fighting for house points. They're fighting for home. For now, let's celebrate the fact that Helga's kindness is strength philosophy ends up being the shield that holds, while Voldemort is busy monologuing on the front lawn. So picture it. The walls shaking, kids dueling Death Eaters, Founders' relics being destroyed one by one. If the 4 founders could see the Battle of Hogwarts, would they feel horror at what their school became, pride at what their students did, or some deeply confusing mix of both? Yeah, take a moment. We'll get to that later. So let's actually answer that. Let's start with the loudest reaction in the room. Godric Gryffindor watching Neville Longbottom charge a giant murder snake with his sword. You just know Godric is in the cosmic VIP box, tankard in hand, seeing this slightly awkward cardigan-wearing kid sprint at Nagini and go full executioner. The sword of Gryffindor flashes out of the sorting hat. Neville swings. Nagini's head goes flying, and somewhere in the afterlife you hear, "That one's mine." Godric, who literally built a house around reckless courage and dramatic timing, is watching a student he never met embody his entire brand in one swing. If you're wondering when Godric finally forgives the hat for ever putting a Gryffindor in Slytherin, it's probably that moment. Rowena Ravenclaw's view? Way messier. Imagine being the genius who enchanted a diadem to enhance wisdom, only to see it centuries later as a Horcrux screaming in fiendfire. That's your life's work, your lost daughter's last link, and Voldemort turned it into a dark soul storage device. Look, nobody was surprised he'd loot ancient artifacts, but still. Yet at the exact same time, Rowena's house is doing peak Ravenclaw, Luna's quiet pattern recognition, the Room of Requirement's weirdly specific logic, the way knowledge about Horcruxes, basilisk fangs, and fiendfire all stack together to finish Voldemort's collection of cursed jewelry. Rowena's probably heartbroken and proud in the same breath like, "My diadem is in cursed fire, but the thesis work, immaculate." Helga Hufflepuff, meanwhile, is having the emotional equivalent of a standing ovation. Her cup is destroyed in a Gringotts heist. For now, let's celebrate the fact that her students show up in droves to defend Hogwarts. Tonks fighting while pregnant, Zacharias Smith rage-quitting, but a ton of unnamed Hufflepuffs staying, forming shield lines, dragging the injured to safety, treating the castle like the home you protect even when nobody's writing songs about you. This is Helga's whole deal. Loyalty, hard work, decency under fire. The wizarding world remembers Gryffindor heroics, but Helga sees the quiet kids patching wounds and holding the courtyard, and she knows her house did exactly what she built it to do. And then there's Salazar, the man who wanted Hogwarts pure watching Voldemort, a half-blood, stand in Slytherin's name and justify mass murder with his rhetoric. Does Salazar double down, muttering that the vision was right, just poorly managed? Or does seeing a snake-faced fanatic weaponize his ideals, slaughter students, and turn his basilisk's old hunting ground into a war zone, finally break through the arrogance, which, if you've been paying attention, is the core Slytherin tragedy. Ambition without a conscience picks its own monsters. Because here's the real question. Did the houses stay true to any of this? Or did 1,000 years of trauma, politics, and bad headmasters twist them into something the founders wouldn't even recognize? We'll get to that later. So did Gryffindor stay Godric's house, or did it slowly morph into the people who almost die for fun house? Let's start with what Godric actually wanted. Godric Gryffindor is the medieval knight of the group, sword on his hip, honor on his sleeve, and this very specific brand of courage that's tied to chivalry, protection, and standing up to bullies, even when they're your friends. This is the guy who literally gave the sorting hat his own hat, so it could keep picking students who valued bravery, nerve, and daring over comfort or safety. Noble. Slightly unhinged, but noble. Fast forward 1,000 years, and prank wars. By the time James Potter shows up, Gryffindor courage has drifted from I will ride into battle for justice to I will dangle my classmate upside down in public because it's Tuesday. The Marauders are talented, loyal, and incredibly brave, but that bravery keeps sliding into recklessness, illegal animagus transformations, life-threatening pranks on Snape, and a general vibe of school rules are optional suggestions. Look, nobody was surprised that Filch hated them. If you're wondering where that leaves Harry, he lands in a totally different place on the same spectrum. James's courage is cocky teenage bravado. Harry's courage is trauma-informed survival. He's not breaking into the ministry because it sounds fun. He's doing it because he's watched people die, and he refuses to let it keep happening. Same house, same sword, completely different emotional engine. Godric runs toward danger because it's honorable. James runs toward it because he's invincible, until he isn't. Harry runs toward it because nobody else should have to. Along the way, Gryffindor's brand gets messier. Bravery mutates into a reputation for rule-breaking. Fred and George, turning exams into a fireworks apocalypse. The trio casually founding Dumbledore's army. First year sneaking into forbidden corridors like it's a hobby. The castle literally has a forbidden forest, and somehow 90% of unauthorized field trips come from one house. Yeah, take a moment. And then you have McGonagall, the modern upgraded patch for Gryffindor 1.0. She's strict but fair, will absolutely assign you a week of detentions, and then transform into a tabby, and dual Death Eaters on the weekend. She embodies Godric's better traits, courage with discipline, loyalty with boundaries, and this fierce protectiveness of her students that never slips into enabling their worst impulses. She backs Harry when it matters, but she also tells him to stop being ridiculous. Honestly, she's what happens when you take the Gryffindor stereotype and remove the stupidity. Now, layer the Slytherin rivalry on top of all this. What started as a philosophical clash between Godric and Salazar about who deserved to learn magic hardened into a generational blood feud. By Harry's era, kids are inheriting prejudices like their family heirlooms. Gryffindors expect Slytherins to be evil. Slytherins expect Gryffindors to be reckless idiots. Everybody lives down to everyone else's expectations, which, if you've been paying attention, it is exactly how Voldemort wanted it. For now, let's celebrate that Gryffindor still remembers what it's supposed to be, even buried under all that chaos. Because next, we're going into Slytherin's evolution, from Salazar's elitist fever dream to a house that's way more complicated, morally grey, and uncomfortably relatable than anyone in red and gold wants to admit. So let's talk about the snake in the room. Slytherin, the house that, by Harry's era, had basically become where we store future war criminals. And look, nobody was surprised. When your founder is the guy who literally built a secret murder basement with a basilisk, you're not exactly starting from a neutral brand position. Let's start with the receipts. Voldemort, Slytherin. Lucius Malfoy and his whole walking hair care advert family, Slytherin. A depressing number of Death Eaters, all proudly rocking Salazar's favorite talking point, blood purity. Salazar's obsession with pure blood only didn't just make him storm out on the other founders. It baked a superiority complex straight into the house culture. By the time Tom Riddle showed up, Slytherin was basically primed for a charismatic sociopath who spoke fluent elitist nonsense. But if you're wondering whether that's the whole story, it isn't. Because even during the worst years,
Slytherin kept quietly producing people who complicated the evil snake meme. Enter Horace Slughorn, human slug in a velvet waistcoat. He absolutely collects famous students like chocolate frog cards, but he also remembers birthdays, boosts careers, and genuinely loves his kids. This is Salazar's ambition, minus the genocidal DLC. Then you've got Snape. Yeah, take a moment. The greasy, bat-like terror of potions class, who also ended up being Dumbledore's most crucial double agent. He buys into Slytherin values hard. Secrecy, survival, doing what it takes. But he turns all of that against Voldemort, weaponizing Salazar's toolkit to protect the son of the woman he loved. It's tragic, it's petty, it's noble, it's a mess, and it is extremely Slytherin. And Regulus Black, the fandom's favorite background character promotion. Pure blood, Death Eater, then quietly horrified intern who realizes the Dark Lord is actually unhinged. He steals the Locket Horcrux, leaves creature instructions, and dies in a cave, trying to undo the monster he once followed. Salazar wanted loyal, cunning purebloods.
He got one who used those traits to betray his ideological heir. The Battle of Hogwarts is where all of this collides. Slytherin students are sent to the dungeons, some parents yank their kids and flee. And yeah, a chunk of the house absolutely chooses survival over heroics. But others stay. Some come back with their families to fight. You can feel the identity crisis kicking in. Are we the house of cowards, or the house that survives long enough to change the game? Pattern interrupt. Fast forward a decade. Kingsley's rebuilding the Ministry. McGonagall's running Hogwarts. Dementors are out of a job, and pureblood supremacy is now a career-ending opinion. In that world, Slytherin can't coast on, "My great-great-grandfather bullied a goblin" anymore. Ambition still sells, but now it's about who can reform corrupt laws fastest, who can navigate Wizengamot politics, who can out-scheme bigots instead of muggle-borns. Give it a few generations, and Slytherin might be unrecognizable to Salazar. Same cunning, same intensity, same I have a 12-step plan and 3 backups, but pointed at social justice, creature rights, and dismantling the exact systems their founder adored. The house of strategic activists, policy sharks, and charismatic reformers. Still schemers. Just on the right side this time. And if that sounds impossible, remember, Hogwarts has already watched one founder's dream curdle. Next, we're going to see how another founder's legacy almost disappeared completely, and then quietly reshaped the wizarding world from the shadows. From powerhouse politicians to the weird kids in the tower, the Ark. The absolute Ark. If you're wondering which founder's dream almost vanished, and then quietly rewired the wizarding world, welcome to Ravenclaw. Let's start with their reputation. Officially, Ravenclaw is the house of wit, learning, and wisdom. Unofficially, it's the house where you either cry over exams or wander the quarters, barefoot talking about Nargles. Cho Chang and Luna Lovegood are the two ends of that spectrum. Cho is the classic gifted kid, smart, high-achieving, emotionally overwhelmed, and carrying more grief than any 16-year-old should. Luna is the unbothered chaos mystic, walking encyclopedia of creatures that may or may not exist, who treats social norms like optional side quests. Both are exactly what Rowena ordered. Rowena Ravenclaw built her house on the idea that intellect is everything. Original thought, creative problem solving, the students who'd rather argue with a book than another person, which, if you've been paying attention, sounds inspiring until you realize what happens to kids who get told they're the smart one every 5 minutes. Because once you're the smart one, you're not allowed to fail. You're not allowed to not know. You end up like Cho, crushed between tragedy, academic pressure, and the expectation that you'll handle it all gracefully because you got an O in charms. Or like the nameless Ravenclaws in the background. The ones pulling all-nighters in that starry blue common room while everyone assumes they're fine. Spoiler, they're not fine. They're just good at arithmancy. At the same time, Ravenclaw is weirdly the safest place in Hogwarts to be weird. Luna gets bullied, yes, but the house still lets her be Luna. You've got students building experimental charms, inventing new theories of transfiguration, and probably starting 3 different illegal research clubs before breakfast. That tolerance for oddity, That's pure Rowena. She didn't want copy-paste geniuses. She wanted people who could think sideways, upside down, and through walls. Literally through walls, if we're talking about that riddle door. The entrance to the Ravenclaw common room doesn't use a password. It gives you a logic puzzle. Sounds fun, right? Until you're standing there at 2 a.m, brain fried, holding 3 textbooks and a mental breakdown. Constant mental engagement is great until it becomes gatekeeping. If you think differently, if you're panicking, if you just bombed an exam and your brain is static, congratulations, you live in the hallway now. Rowena's ideal of pure intellect built a house that celebrates brilliance and eccentricity, but also quietly normalizes pressure, isolation, and performance. Yeah, take a moment, because the tragedy is that this culture didn't just hurt random students. It hit her family, her daughter, Helena, the girl who grew up in the shadow of the smartest witch of her age, and tried to literally steal perfection. We'll get to that later, but ask yourself, if Rowena had seen what that obsession did to Helena, would she have changed Ravenclaw House at all? Or was the cost of perfection always going to be someone like her own child? So after Rowena's tragedy and Slytherin's drama, you hit Helga and people go, "Oh, Hufflepuff, the potato of Hogwarts." Yeah, take a moment. Because that joke house quietly ended up running the wizarding world's backbone. Let's start with the leftovers myth. If you're wondering whether Hufflepuff really just scoops up whoever's left after the hat's big 3, the answer is no, and the receipts are brutal. Nymphadora Tonks, Metamorph Magus, Auror, literal frontline fighter who kept working while pregnant. Cedric Diggory, the guy even Harry admitted was better at basically everything, who walked into the Triwizard tournament and just did the tasks. No drama, just competency. Newt Scamander, socially awkward chaos cardigan, who nonetheless wrote the Magizoology Bible and helped stop Grindelwald. And then, at the Battle of Hogwarts, a ton of unnamed Hufflepuffs stayed to fight. Not for glory, not for prophecy, just because it was right. That is Helga's legacy in action. Hard work, loyalty, fairness. Boring on paper. Terrifying in practice. Because you can't bribe that. You can't ego trip that. Those values produce the people who actually show up, do the shift, file the paperwork, and hold the line while everyone else is busy having a character arc. Hufflepuffs are the healers who don't abandon St. Mungo's when it's overflowing. The ministry clerks who quietly refuse to lose inconvenient files. The Aurors who don't need their own chocolate frog card to keep hunting dark wizards. They're the reason institutions keep functioning after the chosen one rides off into the sunset. Which, if you've been paying attention, is exactly what Helga did at Hogwarts. Feed everyone, treat them fairly, and keep the place running while the others argued about ideology. And here's the wild part. Hufflepuff's biggest PR problem might actually be its secret weapon. Gryffindors get saddled with hero expectations. Slytherins get villain stamped on their foreheads at age 11. Ravenclaws are supposed to be geniuses 24/7. Hufflepuffs? No flashy stereotype. You're nice and hardworking, that's it. Apparently that's not exciting enough for the Sorting Hat marketing department, but it does mean less toxic pressure. No one's asking a Hufflepuff first year if they're the next Harry Potter or the next Dark Lord. They get room to fail, try again, and quietly become terrifyingly competent adults while everyone's busy staring at Gryffindor Tower. And socially, they're the glue. Hufflepuffs are the ones bridging Gryffindor-Slytherin friendships, sitting with the kid eating alone, organizing the study group that somehow includes a Ravenclaw who never shares notes with anyone. They're usually first to volunteer, last to abandon a friend, and the ones who make Hogwarts feel like a community instead of 4 rival sports teams trapped in a castle. So if you had to pick a founder as your personal mentor, are you sure you wouldn't want the one who creates stable, happy, quietly powerful people? We'll get to that thought experiment later, but start asking yourself, in a world of cursed artifacts and dead basilisks, is Helga Hufflepuff secretly the S-tier choice? So let's actually run the thought experiment. You're 11, the Sorting Hat has just finished yelling your destiny at the entire school, and now one of the founders steps out of a portrait and says, "Congratulations, you're mine now." Who do you want claiming you for 4 to 7 business years of magical trauma and growth? Let's start with Godric. Training under Gryffindor is basically wizarding CrossFit with extra explosions. You're up before sunrise for light dueling practice, which is code for being stunned into the floor until you learn to block without flinching. Courage drills, every day. Jump off the moving staircase and trust your shield charm. Volunteer to fight the boggart first. Raise your hand when somebody says, "We need a distraction." Godric's feedback style? That was brilliant, you only almost died twice. Inspiring, chaotic, and he absolutely ends up giving you his old hat to figure you out when you're spiraling. If you're wondering who turns you into a legendary hero or a very loud ghost, it's this guy. Rowena as a mentor is a different kind of intense. No shouting, no chaos. Just a reading list so long it should count as a cursed artifact. You're in the library so much Madame Pince starts asking you for recommendations. Rowena has you designing experimental spell work before breakfast, annotating arithmancy proofs at lunch, and rewriting your essay because you misplaced a comma in an ancient runes translation. Her signature move is the "I'm not angry, just disappointed in your thesis" stare that makes even Voldemort's wand hand shake. But she's also the one walking you through how to invent the next big charm, quietly reminding you that the sorting hat was their idea, and expecting you to treat magic like an art form, not a blunt object. Helga? Look, nobody was surprised that her mentorship feels like free therapy with snacks. You show up to her classroom, and she already knows what you're good at, what you're scared of, and what you'll pretend you're fine about until you cry into a pumpkin pasty. She's teaching you practical magic nonstop. Healing charms, food conjuring, defensive wards, the kind of everyday spells that actually keep people alive. She cheers your small wins, fixes your technique, and then casually has you dueling 3 older students at once, while she offers biscuits and says, "You're doing brilliantly, dear." For now, let's celebrate the fact that she quietly turns you into a tank without ever raising her voice. And then there's Salazar. Yeah, take a moment. His mentorship program is rigorous. We're talking ruthless training, brutally honest assessments, and constant tests of loyalty that make you wonder if you accidentally joined a very well-dressed cult. He's drilling you in advanced dark defense, obscure curses, and all the ways people can manipulate you so you'll never be caught unprepared. You learn a lot. You also start asking, are we the baddies? At least twice a week. Which, if you've been paying attention, is kind of the Slytherin experience at its most extreme. So start choosing. Which founder do you actually want as your personal mentor, and why? Hold that thought, because I'm going to make you defend your pick in the comments at the end, receipts and all. So you've picked your mentor founder in your head. Cute. Now let's talk about the part nobody really wants to admit. We don't actually know how any of them died. Let's start with the boring but important bit. Rowling gave us shockingly few hard details about the founders' later lives. For 4 people who literally built the most famous school in the wizarding world, their final chapters are basically redacted. We get fragments, vibes, and 1 or 2 heartbreak gut punches, and that's it. Which, if you've been paying attention, is why fandom went absolutely wild, filling in the gaps. What do we actually know? Salazar first. Salazar Slytherin left Hogwarts after that massive, ideological meltdown over Muggle-born students, and never came back. Canon just says he departed, and the rift was permanent. No duel to the death in the Great Hall, no trial, no dramatic balcony fall. He walks out, leaves a basilisk in the basement like the world's worst booby-trapped Airbnb, and disappears into legend. Rowena Ravenclaw? We get one of the only clearish endings. The Grey Lady tells us Rowena fell gravely ill and died shortly after Helena was murdered by the Bloody Baron. The story is framed like Rowena literally died of a broken heart, still longing to see her daughter one last time. It's operatic, it's messy, and it tracks with the woman whose greatest invention, the enchanted diadem, ended up cursing her own family. Helga Hufflepuff and Godric Gryffindor, though, their deaths are basically unrecorded. No year, no epic final spell, just silence. So fandom does what fandom does and starts theory crafting. If you're wondering about Godric, the obvious fan theory is that he dies in battle. The sword, the lion, the whole let's charge the dragon head on and ask questions later energy practically begs for a last stand. People imagine him defending a village from muggle witch hunters or protecting young witches and wizards, while the castle is still a fragile experiment. But there's another version that's quietly powerful. Godric as the aging warrior who actually lives long enough to become the wise, cranky elder statesman, retiring somewhere windswept while the sorting hat keeps yelling in his voice. Helga, look, nobody was surprised that fandom decided she's the one who stays. The working theory is that Helga Hufflepuff outlives, or at least outlasts the others at Hogwarts, holding the place together, while grief, politics, and basilisk drama try to tear it apart. You can easily picture her overseeing the first big staff transitions, making sure the kitchens stay open to everyone, and quietly hardwiring that inclusive, pull-up-a-chair culture so deep into the castle that not even centuries of pureblood nonsense can dig it out. We'll get to that later, but here's the wild part. Even though their bodies are long gone, their voices never actually left. Godric's old hat, enchanted by all four founders, ended up as the sorting hat. So every September, when it starts singing and arguing and shoving 11-year-olds into life-defining boxes, you're basically hearing an echo of the founders themselves. Their fight, their values, their unfinished business, replayed over and over in every sorting ceremony. So when the hat drops over a kid's eyes, that is not a magical BuzzFeed quiz. That is a 1,000-year-old argument booting back up like a cursed Windows update. The hat is literally channeling 4 clashing philosophies at once and making a judgment call about where this tiny, terrified 11-year-old will actually thrive. Let's start with what it's really doing. Gryffindor is in there asking, will they be brave when it counts? Ravenclaw is poking at curiosity and creativity. Hufflepuff is grilling them about loyalty and work ethic. Slytherin is scanning for ambition and survival instincts, all at the same time. The hat isn't sorting for who you are today, it's sorting for who you might become if you're dropped into one of 4 very specific pressure cookers. And sometimes, the founders do not agree. That's a hat stall. When the hat spends ages on a student, you're basically watching Godric, Rowena, Helga, and Salazar argue in real time. McGonagall, Hermione, Neville, even Peter Pettigrew, all canon hat stalls or near misses, which, if you've been paying attention, tells you the founders' values overlap way more than the fandom house stereotype quizzes want you to believe. Take Hermione. The hat seriously considered Ravenclaw. Of course it did. Walking encyclopedia, color-coded planner, the whole thing. But Rowena's intelligence and Helga's hard work are neighbors, not strangers, and Godric is over there yelling. She'll walk into danger for her friends without blinking. The hat decides the bravest part of her is the most important part, and boom, Gryffindor. Harry? Classic Slytherin candidate, ambitious, resourceful, speaks Parseltongue, has Voldemort literally hitchhiking in his skull. Salazar is like, yes, that one, but Harry chooses not to go there. The hat actually adjusts. It weighs his choice as a statement of values. It's not just reading his mind, it's letting him co-author the decision. Free will, but make it magically audited. And then Neville, the boy who spent first year losing his toad and his confidence. The hat almost put him in Hufflepuff because he's loyal, kind, and not exactly screaming war hero. But it also sees who he could be with the right people pushing him. So it throws him into Gryffindor, where he gets roommates who drag him into danger until he becomes the guy who beheads Nagini. Yeah, take a moment. If you're wondering why the Sorting Hat keeps dropping absolute bangers every September, that's the Sorting Song. Every year, it climbs onto that stool and basically gives a TED Talk about the founders, what they got right, what they messed up, and how the wizarding world is currently proving their point or wrecking it. During the Chamber of Secrets year, it literally warns everyone the houses are dividing too much. It updates the speech as history unfolds, like a very judgmental Spotify Wrapped. For now, let's celebrate how iconic that is, but also maybe panic a little, because if the sorting ceremony is a yearly reenactment of an ancient fight, we have to ask, did the founders' system actually help Hogwarts survive? Or did it quietly break the school from the inside?
And what would a fixed Hogwarts even look like if you dared to rewrite their rules? So did the founders actually save Hogwarts? Or did they accidentally booby-trap the entire school for 1,000 years? Let's start with the good news, because if you're wondering why Hogwarts is still standing at all, it's basically their fault. These four built a literal fortress of learning in the early Middle Ages, when witch hunting wasn't just a vibe, it was an actual career path. They picked a remote Scottish location, stacked it with protective enchantments, and created a place where magical kids could learn openly instead of trying not to set their thatched roofs on fire at home. That safe space preserved spells, lore, and whole branches of magic that would have been lost. And it didn't just produce overachievers with color-coded scarves. It produced heroes. Dumbledore, McGonagall, Lily, James, the Marauders, the entire Order, Harry, Hermione, Ron. The wizarding world keeps getting saved by people who grew up inside the system. But you knew there was a but. The house system also hardwired rivalries into the school's DNA. Gryffindor versus Slytherin isn't just a Quidditch thing. It's centuries of tradition telling kids, those people are your enemies, have fun and potions together. Salazar's whole no Muggle-borns obsession didn't stay a weird uncle opinion. It got built into the walls. Liddy, Chamber of Secrets, Basilisk, Emergency Murder Snake, for when your political views need teeth. That legacy supercharged blood prejudice and gave future bigots a ready-made aesthetic. And sorting 11-year-olds? Look, nobody was surprised Harry fit in Gryffindor, but locking kids into a single identity that early is wild. You get brave Hufflepuffs, smart Gryffindors, ambitious Ravenclaws, but the culture keeps whispering that you're supposed to be one thing. If you're a shy Gryffindor, or a non-scheming Slytherin, you spend 7 years feeling like a sorting error. Here's the thing, though.
The founders were products of their time. They weren't sitting around saying, how do we create generational trauma and merch opportunities? They were facing real threats. Persecution, war, internal disagreements about survival. Houses were their solution for organizing chaos, mentoring students more closely, and making sure different talents didn't get steamrolled. They made the best decisions they could with the worldview they had. But their blind spots became structural. Salazar's fear became a monster under the school. Godric's love of glory fed recklessness. Rowena's obsession with intellect ended up in a cursed diadem. Helga's welcome everyone vibe quietly got treated like the leftovers table. After Voldemort, you start to see the repair work. McGonagall as headmistress. Slytherins not automatically treated like Death Eater interns. Interhouse friendships being normal instead of revolutionary. The war forced everyone to admit. Courage, loyalty, intelligence, ambition all fought side by side. Post-war Hogwarts is trying to keep the founders' best intentions. Safety, community, excellence, while finally naming and sanding down the toxic bits. Pattern interrupt for you. Imagine walking into Hogwarts and no houses, no Gryffindor tower, no Slytherin dungeon, no hourglasses bleeding rubies and emeralds in the Great Hall. Would that actually feel like Hogwarts anymore? Or did the founders, for better and worse, build something we can't imagine the wizarding world without? We'll get to that later, when we talk about how each founder's legacy keeps mutating long after they're gone. So, jump forward 1,000 years from feuding founders and secret basilisks, and you land in modern Hogwarts with Minerva McGonagall in the big chair. Is this still their school, or something they wouldn't even recognize? Let's start with McGonagall herself. As headmistress, she's basically Hogwarts in human form. Fair, strict, zero patience for nonsense, and somehow terrifying and comforting at the same time. She's deeply Gryffindor, sure, but she's not running a lion cult. She respects every house, keeps the rivalries fun instead of lethal, and is obsessed with one radical new idea. Children should not almost die every year. Apparently that's controversial. Under her, Hogwarts gets safer and more inclusive without losing its chaos. The castle is still a death trap with stairs that move when they feel like it, but protections are restored. Security is real, and the let's ignore the traumatized kids policy finally retires. She builds a Battle of Hogwarts memorial. She actually listens to students. She treats muggle-borns, half-bloods, and purebloods like people. Wild concept. Now picture Godric walking back in during the Battle of Hogwarts flashbacks. This is the woman who animated Stone Knights, threw down with Snape, and told the Carrows to get out of her castle. The sword that bears his name literally shows up for a true Gryffindor in that same war. If you're wondering whether he'd approve of her courage and her willingness to bark at the Ministry when they overstep, yeah, take a moment. Godric, the let's build a fortress school to protect kids from burning mobs guy, would absolutely be screaming, that one, put that one in charge forever. Rowena, meanwhile, would be in the library losing her mind, in a good way. Expanded curriculum, proper muggle studies that doesn't treat electricity like a dark artifact. New magical theories, arithmancy models, post-war defensive magic, even cautious integration of magical tech. The founder who literally helped invent the sorting hat and prized wit would love that Hogwarts didn't freeze in medieval brain mode. She'd probably nitpick the syllabus, because of course she would. But the sheer volume of knowledge? That's her dream. Helga would walk into the Great Hall and just beam. More diverse student bodies from every background. Houses eating together. Hufflepuffs. We'll take the lot and make them feel wanted. Energy baked into school culture. Better treatment of house elves and magical creatures after the war. More cooperation with centaurs and goblins. Kids actually learning empathy. For now, let's celebrate that the so-called soft founder quietly won. Community is the point again. Salazar is trickier. Look, nobody was surprised that his portrait would probably start with, "Told you muggles were dangerous." After Voldemort, Death Eaters, and actual genocide, he'd see some vindication. But here's the twist. Modern Hogwarts was saved by muggle-borns and half-bloods. Hermione Granger reshapes the Ministry. Lily's sacrifice formed the core of Voldemort's downfall. Countless muggle-born students fought, taught, and rebuilt. So would he double down, or finally admit his paranoia broke what the four of them built together? We'll get to that later, when we dig into how Slytherin's legacy keeps mutating long after the man himself left the castle. So when Voldemort storms Hogwarts, screaming about destiny and blood purity, he's not just attacking a school. He's trying to rewrite Salazar Slytherin's diary entry from paranoid uncle to visionary prophet. And it fails. Spectacularly. Let's start with that final night. Voldemort walks into the castle convinced he's the true heir of Slytherin, master of the chamber, owner of the Elder Wand, king of the wizarding world. He dies in the Great Hall. Wand backfiring, soul shredded, surrounded by students and teachers he thought were beneath him. And if you're wondering whose legacy actually shows up, it's the founders. Their stuff literally takes him apart. Godric's sword destroys Horcruxes. Helga's cup becomes a liability in a Hufflepuff vault. Rowena's diadem gets torched in the Room of Requirement. Even Slytherin's own locket is ripped off and stabbed. The artifacts he tried to use as immortality trophies become the exact tools that undo him, which, if you've been paying attention, is peak poetic justice. Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. And look who's holding Godric's sword in the end. Not Harry. Not some swaggering Quidditch star. Neville Longbottom, the boy who lost his toad, forgot passwords, and spent first year accidentally setting things on fire, ends up yanking the sword of Gryffindor out of the sorting hat and decapitating Nagini in front of everyone. That's not just a cool moment. That's Godric's entire value system cashing out. Courage when you're terrified. Action when you're written off. Leadership when nobody else can move. Neville leads Dumbledore's army, keeps the resistance alive inside Hogwarts, and then swings the blade that makes Voldemort mortal. If you're wondering what Godric would have wanted in an heir, it's not a perfect duelist. It's exactly that kid. Rowena's long shadow shows up in quieter ways. Luna Lovegood, the girl everyone calls Loony, ends up being the one who can think sideways enough to see the pattern in the chaos. Diadem, lost for centuries. Horcruxes, basically an unhinged scavenger hunt. But it's Ravenclaw traits. Curiosity, pattern spotting, asking the weird questions.
that let Luna, Cho, and other Ravenclaws help track, interpret, and act. Knowledge and open-mindedness, not just flashy spell work, are what let them find what needs destroying. And then you have Helga's people. The Hufflepuffs don't get the dramatic prophecy speeches, but when it's time to fight, they show up in force. Ernie Macmillan, Hannah Abbott, Susan Bones, the entire yellow and black section of the Great Hall basically says, yeah, we're staying. They protect younger students, hold the corridors, and fight Death Eaters with the kind of stubborn loyalty Helga built her house around. For now, let's celebrate that the final stand at Hogwarts is all four founders' dreams colliding in one night.
A castle built as a refuge for the hunted becomes the battlefield that ends a tyrant. Their relics, their houses, their choices from 1,000 years ago are still steering who lives, who learns, and who gets stopped. And here's the wild part. Their story isn't just dusty backstory, it's a mirror. What kind of power would you chase? Who would you let into your house? What kind of magic would you actually want to practice? Hold that thought, because the way their legacies keep mutating after the war says a lot about the wizarding world, and about us. So let's zoom out for a second, because if you're wondering how four medieval weirdos accidentally scripted 1,000 years of chaos, this is where it all snaps into focus. The houses, the artifacts, the chamber, the Battle of Hogwarts. It's all one long, extremely cursed group project. Let's start with Godric. Godric Gryffindor is the warrior idealist of the bunch. The guy who looked at rising persecution, looked at scared young witches and wizards and said, fine, I'll build a castle and train child soldiers in ethics and swordsmanship. His whole deal is courage with a conscience. He literally gives Hogwarts his hat, enchants it with his friends, and turns it into a permanent sorting argument. He forges a goblin-made sword that only appears to those who prove themselves worthy, which, if you've been paying attention, is basically Gryffindor house in weapon form. That philosophy doesn't stay in the Middle Ages. It runs straight through the Marauders, the Order of the Phoenix, and the DA kids pulling Patronuses in a basement like it's a resistance gym. Then you've got Salazar Slytherin, fearful genius, brilliant at magic, terrible at therapy. He looks at the same world Godric sees and decides the answer is purity, secrecy, and one very illegal basilisk in the plumbing. He builds the Chamber of Secrets as a last resort nuke against Muggle-borns, leaves a hidden monster, and walks away like that's a normal Tuesday. His locket becomes a family relic, then a Horcrux, then an anxiety-inducing piece of jewelry that almost destroys the Golden Trio's friendship. His ideology gets hijacked and memified by Voldemort into full-on fascism, then painstakingly dismantled by Harry, the DA, and every Slytherin who refuses to play that game anymore. Rowena Ravenclaw is the architect of the mind. She literally designs Hogwarts' impossible layout, moving staircases, secret rooms, a castle that feels like it's thinking about you while you're thinking about it. Her diadem promises to enhance wisdom and ends up as the magical version of performance-enhancing drugs. And the tragic part? Her family drama becomes canon-level important. Her daughter, Helena, steals the diadem, runs, dies, and becomes the Grey Lady, who later hands Harry the final puzzle piece he needs to destroy Voldemort's Horcrux. Rowena's pursuit of knowledge creates the exact artifact that almost supercharges evil and the breadcrumb trail that helps end it. And Helga. Helga Hufflepuff is the quiet power holding this circus together. While everyone else is arguing about bloodlines and bravery, she's like, cool, I'll feed the kids, protect the elves, and take everyone who's willing to work hard. She builds the kitchens, bakes community into the literal walls, and her cup, yeah, the one Voldemort corrupts, starts as a symbol of warmth and shared magic. Hogwarts feels like home because Helga made home part of the curriculum. Put it all together, and you start to see the pattern. The houses are just their personalities turned into dormitories. The artifacts become Horcruxes, the chamber becomes a battlefield, and the Battle of Hogwarts is basically the founders' unresolved argument exploding in one night. And we're not done.
because after the war, their legacies keep mutating. In the portraits, the Sorting Hat's choices, and the way new students rewrite what it means to wear each color. We'll get to that later.
So now that we've dragged the founders off their stained glass windows and into real, messy, slightly unhinged human territory, what do you do with that? Because it's one thing to shout Gryffindor pride on a quiz result, and another to say, yeah, I would actually let Godric yell at me with a sword for 7 years. Let's start with you, not the houses. Think back through everything we've talked about. The basilisk contingency plan, the diadem brain boost addiction, the loyalty till you drop Hufflepuff thing, the Gryffindor, what if we solve this with violence and vibes energy? Which founder do you actually feel yourself sliding toward now that you've seen the cracks, the temper, the guilt, the weird coping mechanisms? Yeah. Take a moment. Because you're not just picking colors on a scarf here. You're picking a mentor, a boss, and a live-in landlord of your teenage brain. Whose classroom do you want to walk into every day after double potions? Whose rules do you want carved into your schedule while you're trying not to get eaten by the Forbidden Forest? Would you actually survive Godric's training regimen? Or would you tap out after week 1 of surprise midnight dueling drills in the courtyard? Because character building. Be honest. Do you want the founder who turns everything into a test of courage? Who probably calls pop quizzes, quests, and who apparently thought, let's enchant my hat so it can keep judging children forever, was a normal idea? Or are you a Rowena person quietly thinking, academic pressure? Love that for me. Would you thrive in the tower where sleep schedules go to die, chasing perfect spellwork and experimental charms, while your head of house invents new ways to push you harder? If you're wondering what it's like to have your teacher also be the person who literally designed the sorting algorithm, imagine trying to argue with the human version of the Ravenclaw common room door. Maybe you're sitting there going, actually, I want Helga. The kitchen adjacent, everyone is welcome, we clean up everyone else's mess queen of the wizarding world. Would you become her favorite because you quietly do the work, help the first years, and don't start duels in the corridor? Or would you test how far that kindness stretches before she hits you with the disappointed mum look that could make a troll apologize? And then there's Salazar. Would you argue with him? Sit in his office and say, no, actually, you're wrong about blood and here's why. While the walls literally hide a giant murder snake he left behind as a backup plan. Could you stand that level of paranoia? Or would you try to change his mind one debate, one lesson, one very tense staff meeting at a time? Look, nobody was surprised that the founder's story didn't end cleanly. It's still mutating in fanfics, in games where we run around their Hogwarts, in new lore that keeps peeling back layers on who they were. This video is part of that sprawling, slightly chaotic group project. And now it's your turn. Because every comment you leave is basically a modern sorting ceremony, except this time you're choosing your founder, your house, your Hogwarts. Who do you stand with? Who do you learn from? Who do you rebel against? Hold that thought, because next we're going to turn your answer into something a lot more dangerous than a BuzzFeed quiz. So let's start with the chaos. I want you to actually pick a founder like your life, your Newt scores, and your access to the restricted section all depend on it. Drop a comment and tell me, who are you choosing as your personal mentor? Godric, Salazar, Rowena, or Helga? And why? And don't just write Gryffindor because vibes. No. I want a full-blown mini-house debate. Are you begging Godric to teach you sword fighting on the 7th floor corridor at midnight? Are you signing up for Salazar's extremely questionable, advanced defensive magic that is absolutely just dark arts with better PR? Are you following Rowena around with a quill, trying to reverse engineer every spell she ever invented? Or are you in Helga's kitchen, learning the kind of magic that quietly keeps the whole wizarding world alive? Build your case, like you're arguing with the sorting hat itself. Now tell me your house. Gryffindor, Slytherin, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff. Call yourself out in the comments. And after walking through the messy, brilliant, occasionally unhinged lives of these 4, did anything shift for you? If you're a Gryffindor, do you suddenly feel weirdly protective of Hufflepuff because Helga was actually the backbone of the whole operation? Ravenclaws, did Rowena's family drama make you side-eye your own perfectionism a little? Slytherins, are you still riding for Salazar? Or did the basilisk in the basement thing finally make you go, Yeah, take a moment. And if you're wondering, yes, I absolutely want your wild theories too. What other secrets do you think the founders hid under Hogwarts besides one emotionally damaged basilisk? A lost Helga Hufflepuff healing vault? Rowena's prototype diadems that went wrong? Godric's abandoned dueling arena? Which founder would hate the modern ministry the most? Salazar watching Hermione become minister and just screaming into the void? Which, if you've been paying attention, feels deserved? And who's binge-watching Muggle Netflix in secret? Tell me which show each founder is obsessed with. Also, you are legally required by wizard law, probably don't check, to send this to that one friend who is such a Slytherin, or peak Hufflepuff. Drop it in your group chat. Start an argument over which founder was right about Hogwarts, and then come back and report the damage in the comments. If it ends in a 3-hour lore debate and someone drawing a family tree on a napkin, couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. For now, let's celebrate the fact that you're clearly in too deep, which means you need more chaos. When you're done defending your founder, go watch our deep dive on the Marauders turning Hogwarts into their personal playground, or the post-Deathly Hallows timeline where Hermione ends up running the ministry, or our breakdown of Horcrux lore that ties right back to those founder relics. Click one. You keep the binge going, and we'll get to that later, starting right now. So here's the uncomfortable part. For all the magic and mystery, the founders were basically doing what people always do, trying to fix real problems with very outdated tools. They were scared of witch hunts. They were watching friends burned, drowned, and, oops, fell off a carded by muggles. So they built a castle in the middle of nowhere and said, fine, if the world hates us, we'll hide and teach our own. Let's start with that. Fear, ignorance, persecution. Those were their big bads. Godric's answer? Train kids to fight back. To be brave enough to stand up when the pitchforks come out. Salazar's answer? Lock the doors. Only let in the right kind of wizard and quietly park a basilisk in the basement as a backup plan. Rowena wanted to outthink the fear, build a school so brilliant that knowledge itself became a shield. Helga, she tried to outkind it, making sure no magical kid was left outside the gates just because they didn't fit someone else's perfect little mold. If you're wondering why this still hits, it's because we're still arguing over the same stuff. Who gets into the best schools? Who feels welcome when they walk into a classroom, or a lab, or a boardroom? Who gets access to knowledge and power, and who's told that's, sorry, not your kind? Hogwarts sorting might look cute with a talking hat, but it's asking the exact questions universities and companies ask, just with less Latin and more singing. And look, nobody was surprised that their fight over inclusion got ugly. Salazar stormed off, left a murder noodle in the plumbing, and the others kept his house anyway. That's the wizarding world in a nutshell, built by people who are brave, biased, brilliant, petty, loving, and occasionally completely unhinged. The sword, the cup, the diadem, the locket, they ended up shaping Voldemort's war centuries later, which, if you've been paying attention, means even their school supplies came with generational drama. But that's why it feels real. Hogwarts isn't perfect because its founders weren't. It's a place that's constantly reinterpreting their choices. Every sorting ceremony, every new headmaster, every time a kid like Hermione walks into a castle that was not designed with her in mind and claims it anyway. For now, let's celebrate that the wizarding world we love is messy. Messy means it can change. So the question is, what kind of founder would you be? A Godric throwing open the doors and saying, grab a sword, we're charging the problem. A Salazar, convinced the only safety is in walls and passwords and people who look like you. A Rowena, building systems and ideas and clever little enchantments that outlast you. A Helga, quietly making sure everyone gets fed, housed, and actually listened to. Yeah, take a moment, because the healthiest answer is probably a mix. Godric's courage without Salazar's cruelty, Rowena's vision without the ego that lost her daughter, Helga's loyalty without pretending conflict doesn't exist. You're founding something all the time. A friend group, a classroom vibe, an online community, even just the mood in your own house. Fade with me for a second. Night over Scotland. Hogwarts a dark silhouette against the mountains, windows glowing gold. Inside, the great hall is empty, benches pushed in, candles hovering. The Sorting Hat sits alone on its stool. You can almost hear it humming that old tired song, the one that remembers 4 voices still arguing in the back of its brim. Godric booming, Salazar hissing, Rowena analyzing, Helga soothing. Still disagreeing, still guiding, still baked into every stone, and every year, some terrified 11-year-old puts that hat on. And the founders get one more vote in what kind of wizard and what kind of world comes next. If you want to keep digging into that world, you know what to do. Pick another deep dive, keep the binge going, and let's see what kind of founder you decide to be.